Yeah, I mean, people kill each other for money for sure. This coin was gold. It may be worth $20,000 to $25,000. Wound up in the Keys and discovered this great treasure. When we finally got it back and opened it up, it was filled with 16,000 natural saltwater pearls.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Backcountry Manifesto podcast. Today on the show, we are talking to professional, historic, shipwreck, salver, Captain Mike Perna. We're going to talk about the company that you're subcontracted with, 1715 Fleet Queen's Jewels LLC. We're going to talk about some historic finds, how you got your start in it, mentors, maybe mentees. And then the recent find, which is making news everywhere, right? That people are reporting it is 1,000 or so coins worth quite a bit of money. That's called a cliffhanger, folks. That's my introduction to you, man. Tell me more about the basics of what you do, who you are, how you got into it.
Okay, that's a lot. Yeah, so Captain Mike Perna. Well, first of all, let me say just the ridiculousness of this particular scenario with me actually being here, because we're in Montana now, right? And I'm a transplant from Vero Beach, Florida, and, cast out into the mountains of Montana.
How do you like it?
I think it's fantastic. You took me fishing yesterday. I caught a brown trout on a fly rod in a stream, which is like, bucket list for life, right? So
you did a really, really great job.
I appreciate that. But yeah, so where I'm from, there was a fleet of Spanish galleons that sank in 1715, and they call the area the Treasure Coast. And I kind of grew up in that area, and just kind of a natural progression for me. Much like you hunt and fish here, we were hunting and fishing in different ways growing up along the east coast of Florida. Sure. And then started out on the beach with a metal detector, and then realized, there's, stuff to be found out in the ocean. So wound up getting dive certified, found myself on a boat out there looking for artifacts in the water. And it's just that natural progression into where it is now 25 years later.
Okay, cool. So Vero Beach, Florida, also known as, or that area surrounding it is known as the Treasure Coast.
Yep.
How old were you, man, when you first conceptualized that there was this treasure to be got?
Growing up around there, it was always kind of known that this was a thing, and it never was kind of in my wheelhouse or on my radar or anything like that until maybe 16, 17 years old. And like I say, I bought a metal detector, wound up on the beach and just poking around and, hoping to find something. I was naive and I thought, hey, I'm going to go out there and, strike it rich, and this is going to be my path to becoming a millionaire. And that was not the case at all. And then, fast forward another couple of years, it was about 20 when I finally got certified and wound up in the water.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In those initial forays into beach combing and metal detecting, did you ever turn anything up?
Yeah, but not really. I mean, it's very, very difficult. They put a lot of sand on the beach nowadays, so the homes are built right on the shoreline, basically. And so they just pump sand on the beach in an effort to protect those homes. And, a lot of different thoughts about whether or not that's okay. But all the same, all of the artifacts or treasures to be found that are washed up as a result of these shipwrecks back when is all under probably 10 to 15 feet of sand most of the time. So if we get a really, really big storm, it'll kind of cut the beach and it'll get it down to that layer. But other than that, no, that's everything's buried under the sand. So it makes it very difficult. Back when in the 60s and 70s, when guys first started doing this, I mean, they were making a living in the wintertime going out when the beach would cut with, they call them nor'easters or just, yep. And so that was just a thing. But those days are kind of long gone just on account of all that beach renourishment. So.
Have you ever found anything on the beach?
Not great. No, nothing to write home about. And
describe not great. What's not great? What have you found?
I keep it to myself. Just trinkets. Nothing fantastic. Nothing fantastic. Yeah. No, the stuff to be found is out in the water for sure. Yeah. Because that's where the material actually is, and but it doesn't make it any easier to get after. I mean, it's very.
It sounds
difficult.
Like something that somebody who found a lot of shit on the beach would say.
No. I mean, hey, again,
I'm just teasing.
No, I appreciate it. Yeah. No, there's some level of personal life too. Yeah.
Okay, cool. So in your professional life though,
yeah,
you do a lot of this open water, offshore historic salvaging. When did you like make that jump? You said you got certified scuba at like 20-ish or whatever. When were you like, okay, I'm going to do this? Like, what was your professional kind of trajectory?
I guess I'm fortunate because there's not a whole lot of people out there that want to do this and have the passion and desire to do it. It's very hard work to do in the ocean. And so, the quote unquote industry is starved for good people. And so just growing up around the area, being accustomed to being in the water, knowing how to use a metal detector, just whatever, being good on a boat, I was a shoe-in for getting on a boat. And then once I did, fortunately for me, I just wound up with some really good guys who had been the type of people who have been doing this since it kind of started in the 60s. And then, just forging those relationships, they taught me what they knew and just kind of bolstered my skills and stuff and my knowledge in doing it. So, yeah.
There's like kind of like an analogous thing that people do out here, like as fishing guides, right? You want to be you work at a guide shop and they like kind of like check you out. And then in order to get your, guide license, you need to be endorsed by an outfit. And a lot of these fly shops are outfits. And so you kind of go to them and they go, yeah, okay, we'll like endorse you as one of our dudes. And there's a certain level of trust there too, because you're operating on a bunch of the permits that like they have historically. You are representing the business in like a way that is really easy to screw up because you spend so much time talking to clients. Similarly with, the treasure hunt and stuff, it's, or I'm sorry, the historic salvaging, stuff. Okay, well, that begs the question. Do you call it treasure hunting? Like, casual parlance?
I think it's synonymous with it. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. I think, in modern times, maybe treasure hunting's become a bad word for some reason in some circles. So, maybe a little more PC to call it historic shipwreck. Yeah.
Okay. But at any rate, like there's a certain amount of trust there too. It's like, well, if we show this kid how to do this, like what's going to stop this kid from, maybe, jumping claims on sites, or just like a lot of proprietary technique, industry secrets, as it were.
Yeah.
Would you say it's like a pretty fair comparison?
For sure. And, one thing about treasure in general from conception, I mean, all of this stuff was kind of born in treachery. I mean, the people that, first were mining this material out of the mines and stuff in Central and South America. I mean, all of this, the stories that go with that is all
the gold,
all of that stuff. Yeah, it's just not, they weren't very kind people. So all of this is kind of born in treachery. And, it definitely plays on people's instincts, greed and jealousy and those types of things. So, yeah, that's all part of it for sure.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting that you were talking about that because we had just spoke to this dude, doctor or soon to be doctor. Good luck on the PhD defense, man. Or not the PhD defense, the thesis defense. Whatever the weird academic thing you have to do is to get a PhD. He was talking about, he studies the Yanomami people, which are like this group of semi-nomadic indigenous folks on like the Venezuelan and Brazilian border. He was saying that one of their big existential threats is gold miners coming in because they're on a pretty rich like gold deposit. And there are a bunch of legal miners that do not want them there. For that matter, there are certain government, facilities that don't want them there. And they're willing to like kill them and poison the water and do all sorts of things to get to that gold. So it's funny. You think about these conquistadors trying to do that shit. It's like, yeah, it's nice to think that only happened in like,
1600s or whatever. But
it still happens.
Yeah. I mean, people kill each other for money for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So like, I want to talk about like the modern, I guess seeking out treasure with modern equipment. But first I'm interested in the history, I guess, of the 1715 fleet as they're now known. That wasn't what they operated under the beginning. They were called something specific. There was like this event, and I'm interested in knowing about it.
Yeah. So the wrecks have been salvaged throughout the year. So immediately following the shipwrecks, the Spanish set out to recover what they could off of those wrecks. And they did the best they could with the technology they had at the time. And then from, basically the time they abandoned up until basically the 1950s, 1960s, when people started to inhabit the area along the east coast of Florida there, and scuba diving became popular. People were finding coins on the beach, and then they were able to get out into the water and start poking around, basically. And so that's
they had been finding coins previous to the advent of scuba diving.
Exactly. Yep. Because there's the shipwrecks came ashore. They sank in a raging hurricane, and they just blasted on the shoreline and scattered for miles. And so their cargo and all the bodies and everything were just hit the shore that next morning and were strewn all down the beach again for miles and miles and miles.
So this was like one kind of like cataclysmic event.
Big time. Yeah. Big time.
Do you know how many ships like kind of fell?
Yep. So the Spanish were very good at keeping detailed accounts and detailed records. And so we know that there were basically 11 to 13 ships. We know that one of the ships made it all the way back to Spain. It was far enough north that it made it out past the hurricane and didn't sink. But the rest of the ships, they got wiped out. And the reason why it's difficult to know exactly how many ships there were is because the Spanish used different names for the same ships. So a lot of the ships were captured perhaps from the English or the Dutch or whatever. And so they would then rename the ship. But, whoever's making the account may say, oh, the Dutch ship, or they may call it, by its now Spanish name or something like that. And so that starts to get a little confusing when you read the archival documents as to exactly how many ships there were. We know there was about 11. And and they all more or less sank in the vicinity of the Treasure Coast.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yep.
Is there any estimation of how much riches were not recovered? Like, is there like...
Yeah, I mean, they definitely kept good records as to the registered cargo that was on the ships. But
they didn't want the IRS coming after them.
Exactly. So the problem is that they, most of the people who were risking their lives to do this, cross the ocean to get to the New World, get whatever they could get their hands on, and then head back to the Old World. They were risking their lives. So they were trying to smuggle as much back as they possibly could. And so oftentimes on these ships, even though there are detailed accounts with the registered treasure, everybody was smuggling. So on one of these ships, if they had 200-300 people, on a vessel, and the majority of them are smuggling, sometimes the contraband on these vessels would outweigh considerably more than the actual registered cargo. So that's where it becomes very difficult to know specifically how much may be left out there. Also, from the original salvage efforts, they were very good, again, at keeping records, but it's possible that they may have recovered maybe more than they mentioned or less or whatever too. Right. And, there's a lot of that information that may be lost to time. So to know specifically, one thing that is for sure, because of how much wealth was on the wrecks and how strewn across the ocean floor they are, there's still quite a bit to be found.
Right. So it's kind of like their manifests were sort of like when a guidance counselor like confiscates your weed in high school. And they go, there was only an eighth there, but you knew there was a quarter ounce.
You could make that analogy, I guess. Yeah.
Okay. That brings up like...
Let me paint this picture.
Okay.
So
I like it.
Yeah. So, Christopher Columbus comes to the New World. They discover the New World and then goes back and tells everybody, hey, what we just found. And so there's this mass flood. And by the early 1500s, privateers, essentially conquistadors, made it over to discover Florida, discover Central and South America. The first major conquest was of the Aztec people in Mexico City by Hernan Cortez.
Yeah.
Yep. And so
Neil Young has a good song about that.
Yep. And then so once they were established there, people, more conquistadors coming, they were looking for their own civilizations to plunder and, get wealthy off of. So they naturally started to migrate south. And then that was the next major civilization that was to be found, which was the Incas in Peru. And that was by the Pizarro brothers, and they were able to conquer them and take their stuff. And so by 1715, you have 200 years of conquest and establishment, already having taken place. And very early on in the conquest, the Spanish were very ruthless and basically had written back to Spain with something to the effect of there was nothing left to be taken by the sword. So they had pretty much conquered everybody there was to conquer, enslaved everybody there was to enslave. And now if they wanted to send more riches back to the old world, they had to start mining it. So they put these slaves to work in the mines and started to mine this wealth and turn it into coins and bullion and jewelry. And that's when the Spanish fleets would come from Spain. They used a lot of that money to fund their own expansion in Europe, but that's what they would do annually. They'd send a fleet over, and oftentimes half the fleet would go to Mexico and half the fleet would go down to South America, collect all that wealth. Havana, Cuba was actually the capital of the New World at that time period, and so they would often stage themselves there. So in 1715, that's exactly what wound up happening. Fleet of Spanish galleons came over, they collected all that wealth, they sat in Havana, Cuba for a period of time, they got the decree, okay, go back to Spain now, and it was actually early on in the hurricane season, late July, which, we typically don't think that you would have a raging hurricane in late July, but sure enough, when they left, they made it up the east coast of Florida, and July 31st, 1715, massive Category 4, Category 5 hurricane, just boom, implodes right into the fleet, and then that was it. Drove all the ships ashore, except for that one I mentioned that made it a little bit further to the north. By the next morning, the survivors that had made it ashore, because you have to figure most of these people can't swim. The storm happened in the middle of the night. You're talking 30-foot waves. I mean, it had to be the most scariest thing that you could possibly have ever been involved in.
Were there many survivors?
There were quite a few survivors, but there was also, estimated accounts of maybe 12 to 1,500 deaths. So that's a lot of people. And, comparatively in the United States, we don't really have that very large of a maritime tragedy. So it's one of the largest, when you think of the Titanic or something like that, several hundred people died or whatever, but this was major, so yeah.
Conquistadors though, so it's like
it's these people by this time, I guess you could justify it in so many different ways, but
I'm not justifying.
But a lot of people were just your average type person who were coming to the New World to get riches. So whether or not they were merchants or whatever, they weren't necessarily bloodthirsty conquistadors slashing their way across the countryside like the original
guys. Yeah.
But they were very much living in a different time. And, the world was a very different place, and it was harsh to say the least. And, people were definitely doing what they could to get their hands on a buck. And, all of this, the richness of that story really exemplifies all of that for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that it's funny. I mean, like there in the search for treasure, whether that's like, antiquity like level searches for treasure or like more modern, I guess not level, but era searches for treasure, there are these like really heady like human motifs that like pop up like again and again. It's like, how far will you go for $1? Where do these things come from? Like, what's the origin of them? What does that say about the places that they were taken from and, the societies that took them? I mean, I think that's probably, aside from just the idea of becoming fabulously wealthy in a really cool way. You were telling me about your Ferraris and shit earlier.
Yeah, my Uber, my what is that? The Tora app or whatever. Yeah. I rented one time. Yeah.
But it does. I think that's why it makes good stories.
Totally.
I think it's because it just traffics in these really potent examples of human nature.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. Plays on all of that, and treasure in particular, gold and silver. I mean, even the people that the Spanish had come to conquer, they revered these metals. So there is something mystical associated with them that goes, again, through the ages of time. So, and I think that most people still feel that, if you take a piece of treasure in your hand, a piece of gold, especially from this time period, and hold it in your hand, I mean, much like your curiosity in bringing me here now, your imagination just kind of ignites and your creativity starts to flow, and you start imagining who had this treasure in their hand last, like what was the story behind it? Like, how did it come to be? The people who had it even before that. I mean, all of that just starts to generate in your own mind. So in that way, it's very positive, just to get, your mind working creatively and stuff. But it definitely tugs at a lot of the bad human traits as well. So I think that's what gives those stories their breadth and makes them so alluring. It's very, very romantic. What we do is not quite as romantic on the day to day because what we do is very difficult, but we have these little pockets of glory, we say. And, we also say these are the things you don't really see in the treasure books, is all the grind of what we do on the 99% of not finding. But then we have these moments where we actually do, and, it's like a triumph. So, we're celebrated for it. So,
sure.
Much like being here now. Yeah.
Oh, we are happy to have you here, man. One of the, it's funny because you touched on, and we're going to get to this in a minute, but, when you say you hold something in your hand and it, has all this context behind it, a way that people kind of wrap that thought into one word is an artifact, right? And so you guys, much like, Clayton Phipps, who was previously on one of these podcasts, he's the Dinosaur Cowboy. You can check that out in the Dinosaur Days playlist, or just wherever the hell it is in your podcast scrolly thing. Just find Clayton. It's that. You do find yourself as the subject of pretty fierce criticism here and there. And we're not going to talk about it right now. We're going to talk about it later, but not right this second. I just thought that was a kind of important thing to bring up in that context. You were talking about the coins. Okay, so these Spanish galleons, is that how you would refer to them?
For sure. Which is kind of a blanket term. I mean, there were various types of ships, but, I think people just identify with a square-rigged sailing ship from the colonial period in the New World as being a galleon, per se. So
when did people start, or when did sailors, I guess, there's a specific kind of people that did this sort of thing. When did sailors switch from that, the big square frame sails to the sails, kind of how I think of them now? Is that just a function of the size of the ship? Is it?
I think even at that time period, there were, different types of ships. So the square rig vessel, the galleon of the time, was just basically a cargo ship. So, you would imagine it much like a freighter would be today. So it's just basically a giant cork. It was a horrible sailing vessel from their accounts. Very difficult to sail, not very maneuverable. Obviously, if the wind starts blowing too hard in any one direction, that's the direction you're going, and there's nothing you can do about it until you get shallow enough to be able to throw an anchor. So so those were all. It was another 100 plus years later, I'd say, into the 1800s when they really started to perfect that. And, you got these 5-masted schooners and able to go around the Horn and crazy stuff like that. I mean, and very efficient and fast and able to carry a lot of weight. But at this time period, iron, metallurgy and stuff like that hadn't quite caught up. So they were still using wooden vessels basically. And, in the tropical waters of the Caribbean, there are these little microbes they called Teredo worms, but they bore into the porous nature of the wood essentially, and then turn the hulls into sponge. So a vessel that spent any amount of time in the New World over, it just didn't last very long, and so that really contributed to the poor luck of a lot of these people, because their ships would just, spring holes and sink too. So not specifically to the 1715 fleet, but just kind of in general. So, that was something that they had to combat for sure. Yeah.
What do you know what they did to combat it?
They had bilge pumps on the boat. You can pump your brains out and try and keep the hull dry. If you spring a bad enough leak, obviously that's a big problem. Certainly ships just sank just like that. If they could, they would, if they were sailing in concert with another vessel, they could, offload what they could on another ship before the other one went down or something like that. They also used to carry around like lead sheathing. So they would actually take patches of lead and, hammer them into the weeping holes on the boat as a, I guess, kind of what you would imagine maybe pitch gets jammed in between the cracks of a vessel. This would be like a patch, so anyway, so that was their techniques at the time. They didn't, at this time, they hadn't really come up with copper plating, which they did basically in the 1800s. And then they would actually literally just copper clad the whole hull in an effort to try and keep those microbes and all that growth off the bottom of the hull. You could imagine too, as that growth builds up, it's going to slow the ship down even more. So that's all a thing. Yeah.
So when I think of the risks to one of these Spanish galleons, aside from inclement weather and reefs, I often think about pirate ships, right? In doing some really cursory research, and correct me if I'm wrong here, there's only ever been the recovery of one known, like, this is a pirate wreck.
Yeah, I think that term gets thrown around a lot, and I would say it depends on the perspective of who you're looking at it from. So if you're a Spanish, a Spanish individual in the States at that time period, anyone that's English that's taking your stuff could be considered a pirate.
Right.
Certainly, with Disney's Pirates of the Caribbean, and Treasure Island and stuff, we all have this image of what a pirate looks like, and interject that into the past. But there were different types of privateers and stuff like that. But you're right. As far as I know, there's technically one, maybe a couple, but that was an actual pirate ship that was devoted specifically for that. But the English were making raids on the Spanish camp in our area. So when the Spanish were doing their best to recover what they could cargo wise off of these ships, they were bringing it ashore until they could get a chance to sail it out. Well, the English and the French were already in the area as well, which, I think a lot of people maybe just don't make those connections, that obviously the Spanish was here at the time, but, obviously the English was here too, right?
Sure.
And the French as well. And, they were all competing for this turf. And so although it was kind of technically Spanish territory, the French and English were all over it. So
yeah, well, I guess with the Louisiana Purchase,
all
right?
of that, all of that. And you think the Mayflower was early 1600s, they were already, where they were, and everything that went on in the colonies by 1776, obviously you have a huge history of what's going on there pre those moments, so that was going on pretty much right away. When Christopher Columbus came over and went back, Europeans heard about it and they all came a-running. But the Spanish kind of had their leg up on it, and they were good at claiming their turf, I guess you'd say. Yeah, but even St. Augustine, which is just north of where we're at, the fort that's there, I mean, the flag changed a dozen times over the years. Just, these people would raid the camp, whatever, take it over, fly the flag. The next group would come in, conquer them, they'd fly the flag, and it just changed hands that way. Not sure if I finished my thought, but with the Spanish salvage camps, the English were very known to raid the camp. So the next boat that sailed by knew that this was going on. If they had any kind of force, they would park down the beach, send a party ashore, and they'd go in and take what they could. And there was a really famous account by Henry Jennings, and he took
great grandfather Peter Jennings, right?
Yeah, there you go. And he actually did. He took 100,000 coins or something like that from the salvage effort, and then shuttled it back to the Bahamas. So yeah, there was all of that going on at that time. Again, the world was a much different place than it is now. People were just jockeying for whatever they could. Yeah.
Yeah. In the way that I think of them, pirates, that was not really was that a big threat in this area at all? I mean, this is also, I understand, kind of an objectively dumb question. It's not in that people think about this on a cultural level. Pirates have pervaded our culture. It's almost Halloween. They're about to be 30 grown adults dress up like pirates, walking down, walking around. But
yeah. I'll say it like this. So early on in the conquest, when a fleet of Spanish ships would sail back to Spain, they would do it in a convoy of 3-4 ships, maybe. By 1715, they were sailing in convoys of 11, 12, 13 ships or more, just for protection. So, these ships were heavily armed. A common misconception a lot of people think is that these are warships that have been sanctioned by the king or something like that. They weren't. They were mostly all private individuals who just had the wealth together to put a ship together, arm it to the teeth, and then head over there and see what they could do. They had to pay their taxes on the material that they were bringing back because it was the king's land, and there was the royal fifth, they call it. So 20% of any bullion, coins, or bars and stuff like that was paid in tax to the king. But again, that was it was mostly private individuals doing that. Yeah.
And again, we'll get to this, but in Florida, that royal fifth is still
yeah, I mean,
today.
I mean, look at your your taxes. You may even be paying more in taxes, really. So yeah.
Well, okay, so we've talked about the threats, we've talked about the non-threats, we've talked about the history of this material being transported from the New World over to back to Spain. Describe the material, and I'll kind of give you a place to start. When we see these coins, right, they look poorly minted. They look worse than a lot of, Roman or Greek coins. You're like, well, there is a stunning lack of precision in how these things are stamped.
For sure.
And that's because they're not really coins how we think of them. They're more like stamped bullion. Is that right?
I guess that's a good way to put it. They needed money in the New World because transactions were taking place. People lived there or here, I should say. And, so they were merchants and stuff like that. I mean, people, there was commerce. And so they needed money. So this was the money in the New World. Oftentimes, it was when it did go back to Spain or back into Europe, it would get melted down and they would, reuse it either in money or various wares and stuff like that. There is a lot that goes into that particular topic because it was very difficult to smelt the metals down and their purities. So although they were very good at it, oftentimes there'd be like a high copper content, let's say, in silver coins. And so, if you're getting cheated today, a quarter is a quarter, right? And it's 25 cents across the board. Back when, if you had 1 ounce of silver, like that's the currency. Yeah. And so, if it's 20%, 30% copper, well, it's 30% less its value all of a sudden. So, that was a big problem back when as well. But to speak to the crudeness of the coins, I'd say maybe two things. One, the technology to screw press coins was in the old world back in Europe for sure at this time, but those mechanical devices never made it into the New World until, I believe, 1732. So you have basically this, couple 100-year run of people just hand stamping coins, and it was honestly good enough. And part of the reason why those coins are so crude is because just that they were being, get them out the door as fast as you could. And they had so much material that they had to work through that they're just literally pounding these coins out, as fast as they could. So
were they all about the same weight?
Yes. So you're absolutely right. And that's what it all came down to. You were essentially, trading the weight. I'll tell you what. So, I wound up bringing a couple goodies there for you. I know you've been looking forward to this. So these are two, what they call pieces of 8. So one is uncleaned and off the ocean floor looking just like this. And then this one has gone through the conservation process and is cleaned up. So hold out your hand.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So that is 1 ounce of silver.
Look at those things, man.
Yeah. So those coins were, obviously we can't tell because the other one still has an incrustation on it. But that coin was minted in Mexico City somewhere around 1714.
And you can tell because of the
markings on there. That's correct. So on one side of the coin, there's the cross, and then on the other side of the coin, there's a shield. And inside that shield is the markings make up basically the different countries that formed the alliance that was the Kingdom of Spain at the time. So from year to year, that changed. But as you could imagine, to get information, you can't just send an email from the old world to the new world. So if something were to change, a family married into another family or whatever that turned out to be, the king died, that information may take a year or so to get to the new world. And then it would have to, all the dies would have to be changed. They would have to change all of those markings on the coins to reflect that. So, as people get more and more interested into the numismatics of coins, they really geek out and study those variations. But by and large, again, they stamped out millions of those coins right there.
Wow.
Yeah.
And this would have been used for,
That's the currency of the day.
Yeah. Okay, here's a buck.
So as you noticed, I'll show you this. The coin is obviously irregular. And so this would have been poured into a bar and then run through a mill. And so that caused it to be, misshapen and basically flat like this. Right?
And they would just go clink, clink.
Exactly. So you could imagine these two, maybe, these obviously weren't the case, but, this kind of puts it into perspective along that bar, right? And so they would have been, obviously if someone who's doing it with a great deal of repetitiveness, can kind of see, all right, here's about an ounce. So they clip that off. And then, weigh it out, maybe clip the corners a little bit, maybe file it down. Now it's a perfect weight. and then that coin would get hand stamped and then thrown on the pile and on to the next coin.
Oh my gosh, yeah, because you really, you really can see. I mean, you said clip the corners, click.
Absolutely. So in the history of coin making, if you think about a quarter today, it has ridges on it. So back when, because everybody was grubby for $1, if you were a merchant, let's say, and I showed up and purchased something from you and I handed you that coin, you weighed it and it was great, you may take that coin and clip a little piece off the corner. Now it's still basically that coin, but unless somebody weighs it, they're not going to know that, that's a little bit less than it should be. So, but you're stockpiling this material all of a sudden, right? So like your silver pile is growing. So that was a big problem. These coins kept getting smaller and smaller and smaller over time, right? So what they did to combat that is they began to put a little dotted line on the coins. And so when you can look at the coin, you can see it, it had been clipped off, and that, evolution carried into today. And so I would say that whatever, just for, historical purposes, kind of carries over, like I say, into a quarter, that ridged edge. There's really no reason to do that. Obviously, most of the quarters now are clad. They're not silver and certainly not worth 25 cents worth of metal per se. And nobody's clipping the corners off of them to try and, squeeze out an extra penny off of each transaction or whatever. But so that's just kind of the history of the coin making and that. But it's fascinating. And that's why I say, so just like you, I imagine your million questions as to that, the story about that coin, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Wow.
And they would ship back, hundreds of thousands, if not more, of these on each ship. And although some of it would be registered, a lot of it was contraband. So these coins are representative of the coins that we found this summer, but not from that collection. But, identical to what that material was like. But yeah,
wow. Yeah. We were kind of like going through how much that is worth first, like contextually, in terms of, you made a comment about gold coins of this nature in the 60s. Can you kind of repeat the sentiment there?
Oh, just the value of them?
Yeah, like kind of how that stuff tracked.
Yeah, it's just interesting. So when this material started coming to light originally, we didn't have 50 years of marketing, basically. And so, the market value for these coins may not have been. The supply and demand, was a little bit askew. They were bringing up hordes and hordes of stuff because they had originally discovered these wrecks. And so, and back when as well, so anyways, all of that equates to the value of the coin dollar wise, just not being what it is quite today. So something like this, one of these coins, this thing may be somewhere in the $1,000 range just for one of the coins. Yeah. Whereas back in the 60s, this coin may have sold for, $50, $60.
Huh. Well, if we get a time machine anytime soon, I'll go back and buy one from you, man.
Yeah. Well, and much like we were discussing too, when you track the dollar, this can get far out there, but when you track the dollar, like, obviously the dollar is worth potentially less too. So that all kind of tracks. So, the value of the silver is still wrapped up in it, that this is 1 ounce of silver, and, it has a historical value associated with it. And so, what I often tell people is, imagine you have like a shoe from the 1900s, it's great. It's a leather shoe. You may give me $15 for it maximum, but all of a sudden I tell you that shoe came off the Titanic. The value of that shoe went up tremendously because of the story attached to it. Similarly with this, we have now 60 years of history, especially in our area. And, all the people that have learned about it, much like yourself now, you get excited about it, learn that history, learn that story, have an attachment to it. And that increases the value of the material for sure. And, there's many of these coins in circulation, that have survived. So you can still, to this day, go on eBay or whatever and buy a coin from the time period. But without the paperwork that says that it necessarily came off of, this shipwreck or that shipwreck. So that definitely increases the desirability of the coins and gives them their pedigree. So again, you may have one of those coins handed down to you, but without that paperwork that said it necessarily came from, let's say, the 1715 fleet, you can't really prove that. And so, it's not going to hold quite the value.
Sure.
Yeah.
So these two coins, again, this one is, you talked about people adding copper. That's why it has this greenish
Correct.
tinge to it. As the copper oxidizes,
That's exactly right. Yeah.
Greenish. A question that I have for you, and I kind of know the answer just from having done some of this with cast iron pans before. How do you get this one looking like this one?
Yeah. There are various methods with conservation, and, from both chemical to mechanical to like an electrolytic reduction, like you're talking about. So typically what we would do, the silver is a noble metal, so there's very little you can do with, electricity or chemicals that is going to damage the coin per se. And obviously mechanical cleaning, if you're going to scrub it with steel wool, obviously you're going to scratch the face of it. So you don't want to do something like that. But the method that has been employed on that particular coin to get it in that state was reverse electrolysis. So much like what you're doing with your cast iron pans, you would do to that. And, it cooks, like we say, maybe, overnight, and then just a light scrub with some baking soda, and that thing will come out shining just like that.
And electrolysis is you pass a current through the water. I forget exactly how it works.
I would say Google it. If you have an interest in it, Google it and get a better answer. For me to explain it would be, technical and boring.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You hook it up to a car battery?
Basically, yeah. Yeah. The short answer is that. And there are, various electrolytes that you can use in the water. And then depending on how much, you're trying to cook, let's say, versus how much electrolytes in the water versus how much, amperage and voltage, all of those things play. It's not quite that technical, or doesn't have to be, but, how far you want to take it, there is a science to it for sure.
So if you are a burgeoning treasure hunter and you would like to know how to clean your treasure, look that up. Or if you're a home cook and you want to know how to take care of cast iron pans, I think that's another good one.
I think that's something that most people, who have any familiarity with it do, because obviously there's some value in old cast iron that you can find, but oftentimes it's just rusty because it's been on the shelf somewhere in somebody's, garage or basement forever. And and that's kind of the first introduction I think people have into doing electrolysis on what could considerably be an artifact. I would also note that is the same process by which you were to plate something. So if you were to put like gold plate or something, you just do it opposite. So that's why they call it reverse electrolysis.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So, is there a difference in value between one that has been prepared and one that is yet to be prepared?
I think it's desirability. Not being able to see the markings on the one coin, we don't know if there's anything significantly rarer, let's say, about that coin, or more rare, I should say, about the unclean coin. And so by cleaning it, we can look at the markings and study it and determine if it is something that, may be something that may perhaps be more rare. Things that lend to that are, if at the mint when they were stamping coins, if that particular day they used a different die, on the front side of the coin rather than what they typically have been doing, and then realize, we made the mistake, but those coins wind up going out, and now we find one. So you look at hundreds and hundreds of the same type, but now all of a sudden this one has, let's say, a different cross on what should be, like the other coins. So that one you could call a rare coin, and that may drive the value up. So anyways, to say all of that means that there could be markings on that unclean coin that would cause it to have a higher desirability. But also people really like it. There are some people who would almost prefer it to be unclean because,
patina.
Well, there's that, but also there's just something about, if you've seen so many clean coins and then you see an unclean coin, there's something, kind of novel about that. All of a sudden that's like, oh geez, I'd sure love to have one of those in my collection. And to people who really get into coin collecting, you collect coins all the way back, like you'd mentioned earlier, into the Roman coins. I mean, there's a lot of coins that you can collect, and there are people who solely collect, Spanish cobs. These coins are called cob coins. I don't know if I mentioned that earlier.
William, is that just That's
the the crude, misshapen, handmade coins in the
cob coins.
They're called cobs. Yep. And there are people who collect cob coins, and they have their collection and all throughout the years and all different variations. And so kind of as I'd mentioned before, there are other markings on there that tell us it's from Mexico City. And one of those markings on there as well is the assayer. And so over time, sometimes the assayer at the mint would change. And so there'll be, let's say that happened, at the tail end of a certain year. And then into the next year, there may be predominantly so many of these coins with this one specific assayer on it for the year, but then that changes at the end. And so there's only maybe, a few hundred, let's say, or whatever the number is. For that particular year with the new assayer on it, those coins would have a little higher desirability because there'll be less of them, if that makes sense.
It is amazing how clear you can see the markings on this. Like, obviously there are some spots where it's worn down pretty significantly, but like you can make out.
That's not wear. That's just the way the coin was struck.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, man.
Yeah. So that's why I say, they were not taking their time. They were just stamping these coins out and getting them out the door.
Dude, because
he could have taken the time to center the die and really gotten a good strike. I mean, there's a lot of markings that are not shown on that coin that make up the actual die, but they weren't interested in that. They were
this dude did not give a shit.
Well, it wasn't. They had millions of coins to stamp. Just count to 1 million, and how long does that take? Well, the fleet's coming, and they'll be here in a couple months, and you need to have all that stuff ready. So, like, get it done. So they were just stamping these coins out as fast as they could.
Well, I mean, at any rate, the quality of, I can't believe how good it still looks, for all its imperfections by the nature of the striking process. You can make out there's a castle up top, and then there is like a lion thing. I don't know what the significance of that little square is. Do you know?
I do. So I would recommend.
Can we go through it and talk about like all the markings on it?
I would say that because it changes annually, or pretty much annually, I would say I could give you just a brief on that. But best, if you have any interest, just go ahead and Google it. And really, there's a lot of literature out there on that. And if someone had that interest, because it's kind of dry. I mean, like that square represents Burgundy, and then a couple lines represent Austria, and the 3 fleur-de-lis in the middle represent the king at the time. Who?
What about the castle up top?
So the first, so in the history of Spain becoming the Kingdom of Spain, they weren't really necessarily Spain in 1492, let's say. And so there was the Crusades. We're on the tail end of the Crusades at this time, and the essentially the Christians versus the Ottoman Empire, the Turks. They've been and the Moors. They've been fighting for 1,000 years, right? The Moors had a base essentially in southern Spain, is what's now Spain today, and at the time. Leon and Castile, which is represented by the lions and castles, they made a joined in union, and their alliance was enough to put together a force that expelled the Moors from that lower part of what is now Spain. And that, coincidentally happened in 1492, the same year that opened the port up that allowed Christopher Columbus to then sail out of the, that part of the world and unencumbered by Moors.
What is this little icon that kind of looks like a theta? It looks like it's either a crown or like a theta. Like, well, I mean, it's not either of those things, but those are the best that I can.
And forgive me, I'm not, number one, I don't have my glasses on. I think just from looking at it, I think that represents Sicily, but I could be wrong about that.
Then there's like right below the lines, it looks like maybe another tiger sort of thing. Maybe it's like some sort of flower. I don't.
Yes. So those would be the. Oh no.
Yeah. So you have the lines that represent Austria. You have, and then under them on like this wheel, like kind of going counterclockwise.
I can't see, and I don't know.
He can't see, and he doesn't know. All right. Well, if you are a coin sleuth, you just put in the comments what's up there.
Yeah, well, like I said, quick, if you're going to spend that amount of time to comment it, just go ahead and do a quick Google search.
But leave the comment first so we get the engagement.
Yeah, good call. Sorry to nix the commenting. No, just, a quick Google search. It'll bring up that whole lineage of how that's changed throughout the years. It's mostly the same from year to year, but there are variations to it. And those variations, kind of help date the coin. Oftentimes, too, up in the corner, up in the corner of the
Oh,
coin.
wait. Sorry, Carver. I told you prematurely.
Oh, geez, sorry. Oftentimes, too, depending on, how well the coin was struck, up in this corner, there was actually a date. So had the, it been struck just a little bit better up here in the corner, you'd see, the date 1714, which would be a dead giveaway. Those coins are even higher desirability because they just have the date stamped right on there. So any, average person can look at it and be like, wow, that's coins from 1714. That's incredible.
That's pretty amazing. Do you remember when you found those coins?
I do not.
Do you know if... Okay, well, here's a good way to ask it. Do you tend to find these things in singles, in, dozens, or, greater quantities? Obviously, you just found 1,000 of them, or your team just found 1,000 of them. How do you normally come across these things?
It's a great question. So when the original guys, the pioneers that started before me, when they went out and they found these shipwrecks, they found what is called the ballast pile, or the main cultural area of the wreck. So, the ballast, the stones that were at the bottom of the hull is still there. The cannons, the anchors and stuff like that. And then, a portion of the cargo of the ship, oftentimes because of the weight of the silver and stuff, they would store it down low and it would act as ballast as well. But, of course, when a ship runs aground, that's one of the first things that spills out is its cargo. So back when, in the 50s and 60s, when people started discovering these sites, they were able to work those infield areas pretty efficiently and pick up the majority of that stuff. But because these were old wooden ships to begin with, and they sank in a raging hurricane, their cargo was strewn for miles and miles and miles. And so guys like myself now, some 40, 50 years later, we're traveling along those lines of debris, trying to put that puzzle together as to where the next potential dump of material may be. And obviously that makes it much more complicated. We are fortunate nowadays we have marine electronics, so we have metal detectors and we have GPS, so that helps with our location, and all of which they didn't, did not have back in the 50s and 60s. They were just doing this by eye, so people would literally go down and hand fan and pick up what they found. But yeah, so to answer that question more specifically, based on that, there's these breadcrumb trails of material that then kind of lead us to our next spot. And they're very thin and they're very hard to follow. But it may be one coin at a time. It may be a few coins at a time. It may be different artifacts related to the ship, like ship spikes or, ballast stones or things like this, rigging. So, we just follow those clues and try and line them all up, making our best, guess using our intuition, our gut feeling, as well as what we know from material of like kind that's been found in the past. All of that really adds up as to how we figure out the areas that we're going to search as we move on down these trails. And then hopefully, every once in a while you get to the end of the rainbow, which is kind of what happened in this situation. So to put it into perspective, over the last 6 years, we've been following a trail that's about a mile long. And, it's like a Reese's Pieces trail. I mean, it's one coin all day, another coin the next day, nothing, another coin, nothing, another coin, maybe 5 coins, nothing, so we just follow it in that regard. And from coin to coin now, that whole trail is about a mile long. And we're still waiting for the end of the rainbow on that spot. But it's nice because we can just kind of set up. We've done so much work already that we're able to really track this trail very well. And so, we're just set up along that line. And that's where the gold coins that we found this year came from.
That's where I was going with that.
Okay, yeah.
Is gold coins. Yeah. So, the silver ones are beautiful. We were at the, we were grabbing some dinner the other night at the Murray, and you were like, check this out. And you showed me a picture of one of these beautiful gold coins. You were like, I was going to bring one, but then I thought, those are a little pricey to be traveling with.
Yeah.
What is the frequency with which you encounter gold coins comparative to silver? So maybe, give it to me like for every 10 silver coins we find, I know that I'm trying to give you something that I know is not true. 10 silver coins to 1 gold coin, 10 to 1 silver. And then the other thing is, how much is one of those gold coins? How much is one of those gold coins worth?
Yeah. So comparatively, if this coin was gold, it would be a little bit better made because they definitely took a little extra care to make the coin slightly more round for the most part. And they did a pretty good job with their strikes on those coins as well. But yeah, if this coin was gold, it may be worth $20,000 to $25,000 comparatively. Yeah, it's crazy. To give what
Don't mind me. I'm just gonna come in here.
to speak to how many gold coins to silver coins, they were producing many silver coins. It was very abundant, and I don't know what the ratio is specifically, but I would say, in my lifetime, after having found many thousands of silver coins, I don't know, not very many gold coins have come up by my hand. There have been many gold coins found over the years, and obviously if you hit a pile of gold coins, well then, you may have only found 2 silver coins in your whole life, and you got 300 gold coins under your belt, but that's just kind of the nature of it. But I would say the gold is definitely a lot more rare, and for some reason, seemingly more elusive. There is some, again, mysticism that's associated with all of this, gold being the tears of the sun and all of this kind of stuff. But yeah, gold is definitely a little bit elusive, and it wants you to find it, but you got to work for it. That's for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The other thing that's kind of cool about it is just the nature of gold. When you find one of those gold coins, it doesn't look like this.
That's right.
It looks like bang.
That's exactly right. Yeah. and underwater too. I mean, it's just a remarkable feeling to just, see that flash of gold for the first time, because it comes out of the water just like it did, like it went down 300 years ago. So it looks brand new.
I'm geeked out just thinking about it, man.
Yeah. It's fabulous.
I can understand. We did and it's funny too, because we did a podcast. One of our first podcasts was with a guy named Dan Hurd. My enunciation is terrible sometimes. He shared with us some gold nuggets that he found.
Mm-hmm.
Dude, when you put one of those in your hand, it's
a good feeling.
It's very, very cool.
Yeah.
But I like this more even because I don't know, there's some sort of, you know what I'm saying, Carver? Dude, man's hand. Yeah, the hand of man.
Well, yeah, we were kind of speaking to that. I mean, this is a direct time capsule back into, our history and man's past. So, the reason that we're all sitting here today having this conversation is because of the efforts of the people who came before us, right? And, these coins and that story is all part of that lineage that got us here. So to physically hold something like that, that's why I say it kind of gets your imagination going, because I think you just have like an innate sense that connection. But yeah, it's awesome.
Speaking of somebody that found a lot of gold coins, I kind of want to go into like the more modern era of it. They're in the same way that people, and it's not the same process, I know this, but in the same way that, Carver Andrew and I can go out and get a gold claim, right? Like businesses and I want to call them salvation, but I know that that's not the salvage operations. They can go and claim, right to some of these wrecks, or in more often than not, somebody is the original claimant and they kind of pass that down through the line. 715 Fleet Crown Jewel or Queen's Jewels LLC. You got the rights from like Mel Fisher.
That's correct. Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
And Mel Fisher famously found, just like some of the craziest shit ever.
Yeah, he found. So, all right, I'll speak to that a little bit. So tell
me that. Well, could you tell me the story? Well, tell me who Mel Fisher is, other than the guy who,
Yeah. So, there was a gentleman, the story kind of starts more specifically with a guy named Kip Wagner. And so along the east coast of Florida, where I'm from, Kip moved down from Ohio. He was a contractor, and, it was very desolate out on this portion of beach back when. This would have been in the 50s.
Okay.
And I'm sorry. And so he, built his cabin on the beach and just was going to kind of live out his days there. And, in the evening times or whatever, he's out kicking rocks, and he started finding these things that look like Oreo cookies. And, the tale is that he was using them for skip rocks or whatever till he finally discovered what they were. But whether or not that's true or not, nevertheless, he, decided to clean one up and realized that it was actually a piece of silver. So he famously put a piece of plexiglass into a surfboard and swam off of the coast directly adjacent to where his home was built, and talk about, a lucky guy having built his house in the right place. But sure enough, started to see all these cannons laying out there, did some research, started to learn more about the coins and stuff. And then that kind of reopened this, salvage effort to start working these particular shipwrecks, right? So a gentleman by the name of Mel Fisher heard about this.
Hold on, I'm sorry. Time out.
Okay.
Wait, you're telling me that, like, despite very clear history of these ships running aground, despite a incredibly detailed manifest of the cargo that they were carrying, despite knowing basically more or less where all of this happened, people were just like, fuck it, I don't really care that much. Like, to the point that he can go out and just, or is it just that it gets covered and uncovered, so often?
No, people, this was lost to the sands of time. So, I mean, there are many things that happen in the past that just people stop talking about it. They die off, those records get funneled away or shelved somewhere. And, just modern day people don't think about it. And so that was much like what went on here. There was evidence of it from material that had washed up on the beach, but, people didn't know the whole story about the history of the wrecks and stuff. It just, modern day people, they just didn't know that. It wasn't until this material started to surface that people had an interest. And then when they discovered, oh, these are likely in Spanish origin, they started to dig deeper. And then actually, archivists and researchers would go over to there's an archive in Spain, in Seville, and the Archive of the Indies, and that's where all of those documents that the Spanish kept is housed. And so at the time, you could pretty well be just an average person and go there and do some research, and people really started pouring over that, and that's where they learned a lot more. And then people were paid to do it in a way that they really dug in, and that's where all of this information came from. Someone like myself, it's easy for me to just sit here and say, oh yeah, we got all this documents and this and that, but like people actually had to go and find those documents and funnel them out, and that's where that history resurfaced. Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So where we contribute to that is we're resurfacing the history physically, by bringing the material out and adding it to that story. So, although there's all of these accounts, we still find very unique and remarkable items. And, again, they're not like shaping the tide of man's history and, reshaping the way that we look at man's past, but they're still really cool artifacts. They were lost out in the ocean, potentially to be completely destroyed by the ocean over time. And then so to resurface them and then bring them to light, that's a fantastic way to preserve that history as well. But that's all part of that story.
Sure. Okay. Yeah. So Kip is skipping the silver Oreos.
So Kip finds the wrecks. Yep. And they start bringing it up. A gentleman by the name of Mel Fisher, who lived in California, owned one of the first dive shops there because scuba diving was becoming popular. And, these people are out there just taking to the ocean for the first time in a way that people really have never done it. He heard about what Kip was doing, and he decided he wanted to give his hand at treasure hunting. So he packed up everything and his family, came on around with his boat and set up shop. And I think they gave themselves like a year. That's part of the story is he 365 days to make this work. And, on day 360 is when they finally started finding treasure. But that was it. And they did, and they had success. And that really, kind of opened the floodgates for commercializing modern day salvage. And that really kickstarted, not like a modern day gold rush, but in a way kind of. And, other people took to their hand at wanting to go out there and see if they could find stuff too. And Mel Fisher was instrumental in commercializing that. So he basically got awarded the custodial rights from the local Admiralty courts that gave him jurisdiction. So people think, at least in our neck of the woods.
How does that work? What do you mean by that?
Yeah. So there's a thing called Admiralty law. And, just the short of that is that if, let's say, a shipwreck were to have gone down, obviously the people who, if there were any survivors, wash ashore, they don't have the means necessarily, especially if they're in a strange part of the world, to go out there and recover their lost items. So there was a kind of an industry that had born they were called wreckers. And so these guys would go out and salvage what they could off of these wrecks. So basically, the Admiralty law stated something to the effect of like, a guy would go out and say, he would recover a piece of a wreck, bring it into the local courts and say, hey, I found a piece of the wreck. The judge, because it was in territorial waters, had jurisdiction over that area, so would award basically custodial rights to that individual so that other individuals wouldn't work his claim, basically to keep people from killing each other is a good system that formed itself.
So in essence, what you're saying is that somebody with the means to recover this stuff could be like, hey, I have found this wreck. I'm bringing stuff up from it.
And think of it more practical, like a ship, a schooner ran aground and is awash, but is still relatively intact. And, and there's maybe, some fancy wood on there or something like that as a cargo that would be what they would then recover.
This was not something that was, it was like an instrument of commerce, right? But it's not, it wasn't as if this is like treasure specific.
Exactly. More or less, at least at the time that this, kind of started flushing itself out in the Americas and in Admiralty. Law.
How do, and we're going to keep going with Mel Fisher here, but so at what point can a salver keep something?
So that's where, so the salvager would, bring a piece of that cargo into the court. He would, the judge would award some type of custodial rights to the site that would keep other claim jumpers essentially away. And then the guy could go out there, the salver could go out there and work the site, pick up whatever he could off of the wreck, bring it back into the courts, and the courts would say, okay, at basically the end of a year or whatever the term was, the court would give the particular owner of that wreck an opportunity to buy their material back from the salvager, let's say, because they obviously, to great cost and life and limb have gone out and recovered this material, and they should be rewarded for it in some way. Mm-hmm. So this gave the person, if they had ownership technically of that vessel or whatever, that was their boat, they could say, hey, that was my stuff, I'd like to pay for it and get my stuff back. And that could happen. But if no one claimed it, which oftentimes that was the case, the salvager could then auction off, that pile of wood or whatever it is to then reclaim their efforts and, perhaps make a buck for all the struggles that they went through. So that's Admiralty law in a rough nutshell. Yeah. So, into the Mel Fisher days, that is what happened. So they went out, they made recoveries, they petitioned the court said, okay, Spanish has long since abandoned these sites. I mean, they've had 300 years to come back and make any recoveries. No one has, again, they're just the same opportunity as anybody to go out there and pick the stuff up. Right. So anyways, so the sites were awarded custodianship to the Mel Fisher group. And then that carried on for a number of years, and Mel Fisher's family wound up selling the rights to the sites to a different group, and that's turned into Queen's Jewels LLC. So part of my pitch here today also is to just state that everything that we're doing out there is 100% legitimate, and we're not like willy-nilly just swimming off the beach finding this stuff. Like, this is all there's a lot of red tape, and Queen's Jewels is the substitute custodians of these sites, and they don't own the ocean floor per se, but they have the rights to work these sites, and nobody else does. And then myself and my group and the guys that found the coins this summer, the silver coins, we are subcontractors on those lease areas.
Gotcha.
Yep.
Gotcha.
Yep.
Okay, so that's how Queen's Jewels LLC. One more thing that I wanted to wrap up about the salvage laws, I guess, more in the times that they were created rather than, what they're used for now in the context of treasure, recovery. Would the salvager be like, yeah, I'm selling these back to the people? Like, is it like a right of first refusal sort of thing where it's like fair market value? If this dude lost a diamond that was the size of a golf ball, right, in one of these like Spanish galleons, and say he was like, hey, I would like to claim this property that was recovered, would it be like?
I think at this point it would be near impossible to prove that.
Well, no, I'm saying like back in the day. Imagine that this happened a week after the.
Well, back then it was Spanish-owned land, so this is Admiralty law as far as it corresponds to American American law, American now owning the lands, becoming sovereign ownership of the.
Okay, when did Admiralty law?
Well, Admiralty law has been in existence since the beginning of time, but as it played out in America and the United States more specifically with the sovereign submerged lands and this type of stuff. So that starts to get a little more technical on that. But yeah, in the Spanish days, it was different. Again, if you had a big enough gun, you just hold whoever it is at gunpoint, and then that's your stuff, right? Like there's
for sure.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
I guess what I'm trying to figure out is discussing this in a modern way, assuming that this law has come into effect. I am operating a boat. My boat runs aground. I lose a lot of shit, including this very valuable diamond. Right? Say it's worth on the fair market $1 million. Well, I mean, I understand people that a golf ball sized diamond is not worth $1 million. It's a hypothetical situation. Roll with it. So say I have this diamond that's worth $1 million that I am glad somebody recovered because now I have the opportunity to buy it back. Is that sold back to me at $1 million, or is it some sort of adjusted thing where it's like, well, yeah, that was his in the first place and this thing happened and he didn't have the means to go get it?
I see. Yeah. No, I'm not sure, whether it was fair market value on something like that, or, the salver got to, really put the price on it based on his salvage efforts. Because, he might have recovered that diamond and the diamond's worth $1 million, but it took him $5 million to recover it. And he wants to spread that. I don't know how those things, I'd say, get a lawyer. That would be, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
If you find treasure, kids, get a lawyer. That actually brings up kind of an interesting point. I swear to God, I'm going to get back to Mel Fisher. Well, you know what? That there's another cliffhanger there. Tell me about Mel Fisher. I got something I want to ask about amateur treasure hunting, and we'll get there towards the end of the conversation. So, what's the big thing that Mel Fisher finds?
So after Mel spent his time on the 1715 fleet and making many fabulous recoveries along with the Kip Wagner group that was called the Real 8 Corporation at the time, Mel Fisher had heard about a fabulously wealthy Spanish galleon that sank somewhere in the Florida Keys. And so he uprooted his family again, and they moved down to the Keys, and they went in search of a vessel called the Nuestra Senora de Atocha that sank in 1622. So the story there is that in 1622, there was a fleet of Spanish galleons that left Havana, Cuba, and they made it, I think, about as far as Miami, let's say, until they were struck by a big hurricane. Again, the wind blows them hard enough in one direction, they have no choice. And so they made it actually all the way back down to Key West and sank off of Key West about 35 miles and 50 feet of water or so. And there were two vessels, the two kind of sister ships that were the capital ships in the fleet was the Atocha and the sister ship, the Santa Margarita, and they sank very near each other. The Atocha sank more or less whole in about 50 feet of water, as I mentioned, and then the Santa Margarita was driven ashore or driven into shallower waters and grounded on a sandbar. Today we call it the quicksands, and that was in about 20 feet of water. And then, after making those discoveries, the estimates on some of the recoveries that came off the Atocha alone were $400 million worth of, Spanish silver bars.
Yeah. And this is a discovery by Mel Fisher.
And this was the discovery by Mel Fisher. Yeah, that group. For sure. Obviously, it wasn't him solely out there with a peach basket and a ping pong paddle. He had a whole, bunch of boats and, his family working for him. And it's a fantastic story if you're unfamiliar with it. I don't know why you would be if you are from Montana, unless you've been down to Florida or into the Florida Keys more specifically and gone to the museum there. But it's a great story. Stuff dreams are made of, triumph, tragedy. It's got everything in there, and it's an actual story. So it's pretty awesome. Yeah.
So this is the guy that, eventually you got the rights from, Queen's Jewels LLC to investigate and prospect around the 1715 fleet. How big of an area when we're talking about, the wreckage of the 1715 fleet, how big of an area are we talking about?
Again, the infield areas of the shipwrecks are, maybe 1,000 yards, a couple thousand yards as far as a scattered footprint, of artifacts that have just been strewn all over the ocean floor. But, there's material that has washed as far north. So there was an account in 1715, I think, by the governor, wound up in the newspaper in Virginia, of a piece of flotsam that had washed up, and then likely from the 1715 fleet. So you can imagine a piece of wreckage that made it all the way from,
Sure.
that area of Florida all the way up the coast past Georgia and Carolinas and whatever. So, that's remarkable to note. And, if that thing's dropping material the whole way, I mean, you'll never find it all. It's scattered to the four winds. Also, to put it into perspective, there have only been, 5, arguably 6 of these ships that have been discovered. So there are still several of them that have yet to, specifically be identified. So they're still out there somewhere, presumably outside of our lease area. Perhaps, we'll know when we find them, I guess.
Yeah.
But so the Treasure Coast area is, I'd say, 40, 45 miles spread. And then the lease areas are just kind of dotted along the coast there,
Gotcha.
specifically around the wreckage.
So like, not to get like ultra specific with it, right? But are you guys leasing like in the order of, miles of like, like square mileage, or is it like, I don't know. I'm trying to like,
just like the footprint of the lease areas themselves.
Yeah. Like, like, do you guys have access to 30 square miles, or is it like, I don't know.
I don't know the number quite yet. I don't think I can give you a specific on that.
Well, I guess, is it in the order of miles, or is it in the order of like, we have like 10 spots that are like, one is like 1,000 by 1,000 yards, and one is 300 by 300 yards.
It varies. Yeah, it definitely varies.
But that's small. I'm not trying to like ask for a specific thing. I'm just trying to imagine like the rough size of these, of like what a treasure claim, whatever, looks like.
Yeah. For the different wrecks strewn all throughout the Caribbean that are worked and have been worked, the lease area sizes vary. More specifically on the 1715 fleet, it's if you were to tally up the square footage, I mean, it's a few miles of coastline for sure, but spread out. So, a couple here, a couple there.
Well, yeah, I guess if you were following that one, trail of,
I see. Yeah.
it's got to be over a mile.
Right. Yeah. And if it goes outside the lease area, then that's just kind of it. We can't go out there. So,
okay. I understand now.
Yeah.
I understand.
Yeah. And so that's kind of a part of the thing with discovering the new wrecks is, or the wrecks that have been unfound is, you'd have to establish new lease areas on those to go ahead and have any chance of being able to make any recoveries.
When you get a new lease for something, so say that you go, oh, hey, look, this was not any sort of claimant's area. We have found this new wreck here. What's the permitting like from the government? Is it like a very expensive permit? Is it like a gold claim, surprisingly inexpensive? I don't.
There has not been any new permits issued since, I'd say, probably the 80s. So yeah, it's not something that they're regularly handing out, so that kind of thwarts, would-be searchers to spend a bunch of money and then go out and find a new shipwreck, because there's always a possibility that the state is just not going to allow you to pick any of that stuff up. So
are they actively denying people?
On the state laws, it's there's statutes that pave a way for a process to work. But that there's a lot of gray area that allows for, the denial of the final step, which is, hey, I've now found something. I've spent all this money finding something, and then I'd like to pick it up. And so there's a lot of that too. So
are there any, in like the same way that somebody can do some freelance work and not have to report it on like taxes if it's under like however much of income in a month, right? Mm-hmm. Is there anything like, if I were walking down the beach and there was a silver coin, I'm like, okay, great, I have this silver coin. I would assume that I would have to report it to somebody. And I would also assume that they would then make a judgment on whether it was historically significant enough that, they needed it or I could keep it.
Yeah. In the state of Florida, anyways, which, I imagine is much like most states, if it's found on basically public land, then it's okay, and private land. But, if it's found on state-owned land, then that starts to get a little more tricky. And so the state of Florida, well, there's a law that's called the Abandoned Shipwreck Act that was passed to basically eliminate Admiralty law, and they awarded title to every shipwreck unfound or found to the state that has the territorial waters that shipwreck resides in. So basically anymore, if you were within the state waters, essentially, and you found something older than 50 years is kind of just the blanket term.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. So even a Coke can, I mean, you're now potentially subjected to some type of, criminal, yeah, for picking up garbage.
Does that, okay. So, God, this is like complex. Okay, so
we can talk about this till the cows come home.
If I'm not in a state park, for instance, right? So, or like
in Florida or in Montana.
Florida.
Oh,
they don't have a lot of this in Montana,
for sure. Well, you guys got your bones and stuff, right? Like, yeah. So,
for sure. So if I'm not on like a piece of state property, if I'm on something like just federal lands that are not like heavily restricted, and in Montana that would be like BLM lands, right?
Well, so more specifically, where this type of material is,
BLM is very specifically federally.
Yeah. Well, what I was going to say is more specifically, this type of material is found along the coastline, and there's kind of like a, mean high water line to the dune that's considered public turf, basically. And so there's that gray area that has always persisted that, if you find something there, it's pretty well yours.
Yeah.
Yeah. I would imagine if you made a significant recovery, in this day and age, you may have some problems if you went public with it, but technically it should be yours. But, that doesn't mean that anybody can sue anybody for anything, right? So
yeah, it seems that way.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, let's get out of like the legal, stuff for now anyhow. Tell me about the recent recovery of the 1,000 coins.
Yeah. Okay, so
in great detail.
In great granular detail. So last year we put together another boat. We decided, so there's myself, my buddy, first mate, Millen, we call him Choppy, Kalel Carr, and then our good buddy, Levin Shavers. And he was working with us last summer, and we're just out there doing our thing. And we had an opportunity to purchase another boat. And we've been kind of riding high from previous years' finds, and we operate pretty solely on investment money. So we have people who, are hip to our reputation and, want to just kind of get involved in the excitement of it. And so they fund our operations to help us get out there and do this, because obviously I don't have that kind of money to, put that amount of fuel in the boat to go out and search. Anyways, we had an opportunity to purchase another boat. Investment came along, and our guy was just like, yeah, let's give it a shot. So we purchased the other boat, and Levin said, yeah, I'm going to go ahead and captain it. I'll take on the responsibility. So over the wintertime, we outfitted the boat and got it ready to go. And then the summer started up. Didn't even really have crew for Levin, and but all the same, it worked out. We found a young guy that grew up, surfing and whatever in the local area by us, Luke Fuller. And he's like, yeah, I'll give it a shot. Well, little did he know that the third day out, Levin was just going to go ahead and start stumbling into some silver coins. And much like these coins here that I'm showing you today, it started off slow. He started finding one here and one there. And
I'm going to interrupt you.
Okay.
Describe kind of like, because we have the idea of how the coins got there. We have the idea, the kind of environment that it's in, which is just, these relatively shallow waters. Describe the methodology of like searching for these coins. I'd like it to be, give me the basic version. So the smallest operation you could possibly run. Maybe that's just you and your buddies diving. And then up to a more, I would guess, based on some of the stuff that I've seen about these boats, it seems like you operate in more of like the mid-tier like echelon, and that doesn't have anything to do with like, the capability of the divers or like your success rate. It's just like the capability of the vessel, right? It doesn't have like all the crazy, like multi-million-dollar, like yachty.
It's unnecessary for what we're doing. So, we would be kind of categorized as shallow water shipwreck salvagers.
Okay.
So you can imagine a ship that went down like the Titanic, for example,
Right.
that went down in thousands of feet of water. I mean, a guy who's, got flip-flops on and a boogie board's not going to go out there and do anything on the Titanic. You need big equipment. With what we're doing, we're shallow water. So, we're smaller in scale, but no less in heart, I should say.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. You get results.
Yeah. And so I guess, first and foremost for guys like us, you have to be permitted properly to do it legally and really get out there and search in the capacity that is required to make finds. And so that would be the first step. But, we're permitted and we're armed with the knowledge of where finds have been made in the past over the last 40 years. They kept great detailed records as well, the modern day salvers. And so we know where a lot of the recoveries have been made. And so we base where we're going to search on that. So that information aids in our search. And then it's up to, the divers and their metal detectors to really, either have a stroke of luck or, really put their nose in the books and figure out where that next spot's going to be and hope that the material shows up there and really work along those trails and find that stuff.
So is that really what it is? You're just kind of like diving. Is there like a specific time of year where you're like, oh yeah, this shit's been kicked up a bunch?
For sure. So along our area, it's kind of strange to say, but there's like a dive season. And that is typically from May, June to about August, September. So yeah, this time of year we're done. Unfortunately, the boats go back in dry storage for the wintertime and then we just gear up for next summer again. But the reason for that is the winds along the east coast of Florida just kind of come down, and so they're not as rough as they are in the wintertime. And so the turbidity that's just naturally kicked up by that wave action from the wind just makes diving conditions horrible, and visibility is almost nothing, if it is nothing most of the time there. So that's why we have to go out in the summertime.
But when you get there, it's like the deck's been reshuffled.
To some degree, yeah. Most of this material has found its home, after 300 years in the ocean, and so it's settled into where it's going to be. I think a lot of
it doesn't move sand.
It moves sand, so you could have things that are covered and uncovered, but for the most part, the artifacts aren't necessarily still traversing along the ocean floor. Yeah, some people think that coins are walking and currents affect them in that regard. Maybe at some point in the past when there were still chunks of wreckage. But another common misconception I think people have is like this is like a I love the analogy, but like a shipwreck at the bottom of a fish tank or something, or like the Goonies, there's just this whole ship on the ocean floor. The truth is if you were to swim across one of these sites, you would never even know that you were swimming over it. I mean, all of the organic material in the way of the, the sails and the wood and all that stuff has just been pounded to bits long gone. So, you may see things like cannons and anchors that are protruding out of the sand sometimes. But for the most part, those sites are just, completely submerged under the sand. And that's why I say, so, your average person just swimming across wouldn't even know that they're swimming across a shipwreck nowadays. And because that material has been scattered for so far, like these coins in particular, they were found in very shallow water, only about 7 feet of water, but they were underneath a couple feet of sand. And so, if you were out there swimming across it, you would have never even known that those coins were there.
That's got to be a hardcore metal detector.
Yep, there's that. We also have different search methods that we employ to move sand, and they vary depending on the area. A lot of areas, we call it roaming, but you can just roam and get down to where perhaps material is, or in other instances you have to move the sand. So those are all tricks of the trade, or just like you said, that methodology that we employ to go out there
trade
and make
secrets.
These. Yeah, whatever, I think just the implementation of it, anybody can, well, if you're permitted and you do it, but, anybody can just go out there and do it. Guys like myself, I've been fortunate to just kind of be along the lineage and have been taught by the old timers from the Mel Fisher era. And, so these guys, they went through the entire trial and error. I don't have to reinvent the wheel. These guys figured it out. Of course, we all have new innovations and ideas, and every time someone comes into it, they want to reinvent the wheel. But, there's a reason why things are the way they are. It's because they've been, hammered out and kind of cauterized over time into the way that they are. And so just, implement those actions and eventually you will have success, kind of thing.
What, Okay, so I am out on your boat with you, and I
can't wait. By the way.
Oh
Yeah,
dude, no, if we can do that, I'll
coming
die.
too.
Okay, so we're out on the boat together, and well, see, now I can't include myself in the hypothetical scenario because you're gonna know that I'm like not this good. There's a very skilled diver that you're working with who has just been doing this for a very long time. He does not know that there is anything in one particular spot. There's a reasonable assumption that there could be something in there. He gets down to the bottom. What does he do? How does that operate? Is that like putting the cart before the horse? Like there would have to be a reason to send a diver down first?
No. So, we do a lot of surveys. So there's a piece of search equipment, modern marine electronics. It's called a magnetometer. And that senses, kind of layman's version, it senses the magnetic field of the earth. And then if you were to take something magnetic like a piece of iron and put it in front of the sensor, it's going to sense that. And so because on these old ships, there were a lot of fittings in the way of, iron fittings
Sure.
and rigging and muskets and cannons and cannonballs and all of this kind of stuff, they have a signature. In the area that we're at, unfortunately, you have also a couple 100 years of people throwing all their trash in the ocean. And so there's a lot of things like car tires and, just scores and scores of trash. We do a very good job removing a lot of that. But when we're checking these targets or anomalies from the magnetometer.
Oh, you take all the trash out?
Well, oh yeah. I mean, you would be surprised. Well, when you come down, you'll be able to see. But I mean, it would be nothing to remove, 5-gallon buckets worth of beer cans and just garbage out of the ocean every single day. It's not horrible, but when you're, I guess, as involved as we are, and we're down there, using the metal detector, you get a hit and it's a beer can kind of thing.
It's a false target. Get rid of it.
Exactly. Yep. So we remove it. And then obviously if we see a big net or something down there, a big piece of rope, we'll take that out of the ocean too. So yeah, that's, part of what we're doing is our civic duty to clean the oceans as well. But yeah.
Okay. So,
but you would have a metal detector and you go down and so also part of our methodology is we're not just kind of willy-nilly out in the middle of nowhere. Like every time we go out, we're going in an area that we've, researched or studied or have a gut feeling on. And, we call that like our high probability areas. Like we're always staying in our high probability areas because the summer's so short. It costs a lot of money to do this. I'm getting older. We want to find stuff every day, which is obviously, unfeasible. But at the same time too, like we just don't want to be out in the middle of nowhere for nothing. We want to be working in areas where we believe there's something. So every time a diver goes in, we're high-fiving, this is it. Get down there. It's down there, so, and that's every day.
do you grid it out? Like how, when he's on the bottom, what is his like operation here?
Yeah, there's typically kind of just a search field that's, the area that we search underneath the boat. And so he just metal detects that. Yeah.
Okay. And then I guess in your GPS or whatever, you go, okay, this was searched on this date, and
absolutely.
We'll come back.
Yep.
Maybe.
And we keep, highly detailed accounts of everything we do from the time we leave the dock to the time we come back to who's on the boat. And then with each, search area, we go ahead and mark down the coordinates to that, write down conditions on the bottom, oceanic conditions, all of that. That's all logged in it. And then, of course, if we made any recoveries or not, or any discoveries, even modern, all of that kind of goes in there. And, interestingly enough, areas where we don't find things are almost as important as areas that we do because we know that it's not there. So we don't have to go there again kind of thing. But like,
will you revisit it after a couple seasons?
And it depends. And it really all depends. If for some reason, we were kind of searching through an area, not so much with a fine tooth comb, areas may need to be revisited in the future. But it all depends. Yeah.
Okay, so what's the kid's name who's down there?
Captain Levin Shavers. Okay, so we're back on that, the story. So he wound up captaining this boat, and he went out, third day out, started finding silver coins that look much like that, and one thing led to another as far as the next day they went out, they found a couple more and a couple more and a couple more, and by the end of the summer, he had 1,051.
Oh my gosh.
Just like that.
Okay, so, but sorry, what is the kid's name? The kid who had just signed on.
Luke. Yeah, Luke. Yeah,
okay.
Luke. He's working with Levin on that boat.
I wasn't calling a captain a kid.
No, he's a young guy too. I mean, yeah, and that boat was called is called the Just Right, which is just perfectly named. And from my perspective and the way that this whole thing has panned out, we've often said that it just seemed like the stars kind of aligned, but when a good thing just works out, this was one of those things. And
so that's interesting. So what has happened is all the news outlets are going like, this discovery of this wreck, and they recovered like 1,000 coins. And you're kind of like, well, the wreck was discovered, and it wasn't as if we found all these coins at once. It's kind of our end of season total.
Exactly.
Oh, so
yep. And we're miles away from, what would be the next closest wreck. So again, like I was explaining, we're following trails that have been strewn down the coast for miles, and that's where this discovery was made. So although there's no necessarily a wreck in our vicinity, there's material to be found, but it's very, very difficult, and it's many, many, many empty holes or empty search areas basically. So
okay.
yeah. So to put that into perspective, on the Mighty Mo, the boat that I'm on, we're working maybe 100 yards away from Levin, and where he was working on the Just Right, making these discoveries. And, he dove, whatever, less than 100 dives in that particular area and recovered 1,051 coins. On our boat, we did almost 1,500 and recovered only 5 gold coins. So, that's just kind of the way that it works out.
Yeah, but I'll tell you what, based on you're not that far off in a value proposition.
We're not disappointed in any way, so that's not meant to sound negative. It's just, kind of putting it into perspective, like, you can work twice as hard and find twice as less or whatever, there's no guarantee that just because you're doing the right thing and you're in the right spot and everything's going right, that you're going to make finds, so.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So
it's all part of the action. That's why they call it hunting.
Sure. What is it? Or that's why they call it salvaging.
Yeah.
It's historic shipwreck salvaging.
That's right.
When you're doing this, as you talk about the mile-long, trail of like detritus or whatever, that's like, emanating from this bow or getting scattered or what have you, and you say that, I always do that. I go like, you say like as if this is like a court of law, and I'm like trying to, you said this. That's not at all what I mean. Are you telling me that he's finding, like, if this is the mile-long, stretch, he's finding some here and here and here and here?
This particular find was quite localized in the way that, the majority of those coins were discovered in maybe a 25 by 25 foot area.
Oh.
And this is separate from that trail that I was mentioning that's scattered over a mile. So although they're nearby and in the same vicinity, they're not, we have yet to determine whether or not the two are associated with each other. So this may just be a different, piece of material that has been strewn down the coast, running adjacent to or parallel. We just don't know. We need to spend more time out there and do the work and research to find out.
Okay, so what I'm understanding is that although it's like, oh, we're finding 5, 10 coins, like, any given day, it's also, it's all from the same spot. So even though the collection happened, kind of piecemeal over time, it was in a pretty centralized location.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Relative to each other for sure, but you can also draw a straight line between any 2 points. So to say that this came from that doesn't necessarily mean that's a factual statement. We have to fill in the spaces between.
Oh, sure. I'm just trying to figure out like the timeline of the collection of the treasure versus like the area in which it was collected. Yeah. You know what I mean? So you guys were pretty darn close to them. Mm-hmm. Are you finding those 5 gold coins in a similarly, localized area, or is that 5 coins over a bunch of different searching? So,
exactly. And strewn out along that mile-long trail that I was talking about. So that trail, for whatever reason, seems to be yielding gold coins amongst many small denomination silver coins. And so, to date on that particular trail, we may have some 2,500 smaller silver coins that have been that Reese's Pieces, right, breadcrumb trail we've been following. And then all of a sudden, wow, look at this. There's a giant gold coin laying down here.
That's super interesting. So
somewhere along the end of this rainbow, there may be a pot of gold. We just don't know. I mean, there's no research that we can go to that says, oh, this is absolutely what we're finding. This could just be someone's personal cargo. And, there was a bag of silver coins with a bunch of gold coins in there. That could have been who knows what. So we just got to keep going.
So that's why under the Queen's.
I'll be doing this for the rest of my life. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, for real. I don't blame you. So under the Queen's Jewels LLC, it's like, okay, you went over this, you found this like cache of silver coins, you go get them. And meanwhile, you're kind of following this trail of gold coins. So that way they're making the most hay while the sun shines, grabbing as much silver as they can. And you're going like, look, I'm still going to try and find this pot of gold. Is that kind of the thinking behind it?
Yeah. I mean, I would say that either one of those sites would probably be high probability areas because we know there's material to be found. So, whether we were all hands on deck on one or the other or separate, like, we're still doing it. Right. So
did you, once they started finding them in that sort of concentration, did you end up bringing your boat, like staying there for the rest of the season or what?
To look back on the find, obviously hindsight, makes a lot of sense. But in the moment, it's like, oh, we got 100 coins and then, oh, we got 150. Oh, we got 200. We just stood back and let it happen just in an effort that we don't jinx it, or we're so superstitious out there, which is ridiculous. But like, I've been fortunate in 25 years of doing this. I've picked up piles of silver coins and whatever. So like, let those boys do their thing and just don't keep your eye. You can look at it, but don't look at it too hard kind of thing. And so so in hindsight, I mean, if we knew that there was 1,000 coins there, I probably would have broke away and went and had some fun for a day. But while it was happening, it was just like, let's let them do their thing. Just keep doing your thing. So yeah.
Understanding that you work with Queen's Jewels LLC, and obviously these investors are not like, go ahead, man, just have fun. Here's like however many, whatever amount of money. Obviously everybody gets broken off different sort of ways as far as, the payout goes when things are sold.
Mm-hmm. Well, let me say this, it takes a special type of person to do this because this is like a glorified hobby. So the people that, quote unquote, invest in us, I mean, it's a loose term. I mean, they're doing it for the reasons that they're doing it because they're excited to do it. Ideally, to be able to share in a recovery or something like that is all part of it. But, we're not taking people's lunch money, so to speak. So like, these people are well off and have done everything else in life and have an interest or a passion in this hobby, basically. And so that's why they get involved in us. And so, there's no like hard feelings if there were no recoveries made, let's say, in an entire summer, just because everybody knows what they're getting involved in. And that goes for us too. We don't draw like a paycheck during the summertime. So, if we don't, it's likely I spend more money during the summer than I would ever recoup. But I love doing it. And we just figure out a way to make that work. Yeah.
I guess what I'm asking is when like, somebody recovers 1,000 silver coins, is it 3 musketeers all for one for all? Like, or is there like a very specific structure in how that gets broken down? I mean, you don't have to tell me the exact numbers or anything, but I'm curious between like, if Carver, if Carver and I go on a fishing charter, right? Like, the captain gets some, the people who own like the charter business get some, and the mate gets some.
Yeah, exactly. Same thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is it like,
and it's predetermined. I mean, what human, your expectation is the root of all suffering. So, we're very careful with that understanding to make sure that everybody on the front end knows what they're getting involved in.
Hey, it does not matter if you find $10 million worth of shit or $6 worth of shit. It is this percentage. So I understand the big fines are exciting.
Exactly. But, but that goes for all of us because there are kind of a lot of hands in the pie to make that work. And so, you hear this number that was put on this particular find, and people are like, oh, it's about time, you're rich. And it's like, yeah, but no.
Yeah.
It doesn't really work like that. So it's fantastic to think, putting $1 million on anything and saying that you discovered it is great, but that doesn't translate into me making tons of money in any way. Yeah. So
that's not how you afforded all your Ferraris.
Yeah, exactly. That's that Torah app that I downloaded, was free to download.
Here's a question.
Okay.
Do people, obviously being precious metals, they have like, their kind of stock value, and obviously in like a collectible coin market, they have a value. Do most people take checks, or is some people like, break me off some of the coins. I want like the raw thing, you know?
Yeah. Well, I mean, if there is any divisions to be made, it's done in kind. So, this is not, just because you have something worth, $1,000, let's say, doesn't mean you have $1,000, right? So, just like with anything, you try and sell it, it's going to be what you can get for it. So there's an estimated value on that bottle of rum. Mm-hmm. And, if you want to pay it, that's what you're going to pay for. And they're going to hold to their guns. But, if you made that the whiskey, if you made that, I'm from Florida, it's rum. Yeah. If you had that whiskey, and you made it in your garage, and Carver came over and you said, I want $50. And he said, well, I'll give you 40. And okay, so that bottle's worth $40 and there it is, right? Like that's just it. So just because you have something potentially worth $1,000 doesn't mean you have $1,000. So to be stroking checks to people on, that's not really gonna, I don't have that kind of money.
So I guess, do you get paid after like the items sell, or do you get like, if you and I found 10 coins and we were splitting it 50-50, would I get 5 of the coins and you get 5 of the coins? Or would it go to sale, make $10,000 and then you get $5,000, I get $5,000?
It all varies at that point. Yeah. Cause, for example, if you have, let's say 1,000 coins to divvy up, well, that's great because they're all basically the same value more or less. And, you can easily distribute those. But let's say you bring up something like a solid gold chalice and this thing is magnificent and worth $1 million. Well, that's fantastic. But
until the state of Florida takes it.
Well, but how are you going to, split that up between all of the people that, have aided in the recovery of that? And so that's where it becomes more tricky. So in that scenario, it may turn out that would go to auction or whatever, and then those proceeds would come back to recoup everybody that was involved. So, that's kind of the feast and famine of it. And that, is a legitimate case because we actually did find a large gold chalice on one of the wrecks a number of years ago. And that, that was kind of the thing. It was valued at this huge amount of money, but it took many years to sell and it sold for quite less. And then by the time everybody got their cut of the pie, it was, substantially lower than what they had hoped for, I guess. Still great though,
But in the context of coins, you're saying that sometimes you get paid in treasure.
So yeah, exactly. Right. So that ideally, yeah.
I like that a lot.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you guys went out with your buddies and, similar thing, like I said, or with the fish analogy, right? Yeah. Like, the captain's not writing you a check for $50 worth of fish. I mean, he's giving you a couple mahi and you're going home with fish, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So with that Mel Fisher story, right, it brings up like a handful of things that exist within really any like community like this, whether it's people finding large gold deposits or dinosaur bones. We talked about that plenty on this podcast and I referenced it. Or like treasure. There are folks that feel as if these things are artifacts and they have some sort of like cultural significance, which takes precedence over established laws, which have been agreed upon. That it's like, nah, man, like if the Spanish fleet did not come back in 300 years, like that's it. You can take it. And, Florida does like their 20% thing. They do like if it's something of particular historical significance or whatever, Florida will take that shit. Or maybe not Florida, but like the state government will like, step in and be like, yeah, some of this needs to end up in a museum. And it does. Like a lot of times it does. Like sometimes it's a zero-sum game. Sometimes it's like, yeah, well, sure, of course. Here, you can have, how about these specimens right here? You were telling me that Mel Fisher even volunteered when he didn't have to, a portion of his biggest finding ever in Florida, or I guess in federal waters off the coast of Florida. And he said, here, I'll give you your 20% as if I had found it in the area in which I'm required to give Florida that 20%. I think that's pretty good. Florida said, no, we want 100% of this because it's so significant. Mm-hmm. And it went all the way up to the Supreme Court.
That's right. Yep.
So what all like Spark Notes version, very like,
Well, I think he nailed it. I mean, there was an agreement that was hashed out whenever Mel Fisher was back on the 1715 fleet, and it worked itself out that people started to recognize that there was some historical value to these artifacts and that it would probably be best for society and future generations to have some link, an availability to view this material so that they can share in, all of the great things that there are to share in with the creativity and learning your history and all of that stuff we've been talking about. And so, but there's still this aspect of it that obviously Mel Fisher in particular at the time, his group had spent a tremendous amount of time and effort and money to, make these recoveries. And so they discussed it in court. It worked itself out in court, and that worked itself into a 20% rule that we're kind of still grandfathered into on the 1715 fleet now today. And so basically what that means is that up to 20% of what we discover annually winds up in the State Museum, which is pretty much a good thing. And I think for the most part, everybody, across the board recognizes that that is a good thing. It starts to become mildly askew because, all of these artifacts have to be housed in perpetuity. So,
Sure.
There's a facility and it's air conditioned and it's, may or may not be self-sustaining. So it's on the public tax roll. So, as taxpayers, you're paying to keep the lights on and the security guards watching this stuff. And that's forever, right? Like, so, when you start to weigh the cost of what that could eventually wind up to be. I mean, you may spend millions and millions of dollars to house an artifact that's obviously worth a few $100s or whatever. So, those types of conversations get, the morality or the ethics behind them get touch and go. But with the Mel Fisher story in particular, then he, like I mentioned, broke away from the 1715 fleet, wound up in the Keys and discovered this great treasure. And the state of Florida said, well, this is unique because it's its own thing and we're not going to let this happen. So we're going to go ahead and take 100% of it. And so ridiculously enough, they arrested the treasure physically and put it in a jail cell. And Mel Fisher had to, at great expense, fight it all through the court system until it eventually wound up in the Supreme Court of the United States. And David Horan was his attorney at the time. And, just very famous case. And the Supreme Court actually awarded the treasure back to Mel Fisher, and he was the rightful owner, because there was still, fortunately, some level of, morality and rationality that accompanied that decision, fortunately for him. And obviously too, when he got the treasure back, I think there was a bunch of it missing and that kind of stuff. But, that paved the way for him to keep moving forward until he finally made that great discovery and finding the main cultural area, that $400 million find. So that was all part of his history and the tale of woe that accompanies the quest for, really just flushing out your own dreams in anything. Obviously there's going to be adversities and people standing in your way. And for some reason it is definitely human nature, not to speak poorly about any one group, but it is human nature to, put your hand in another person's pocket, so to speak. So,
yeah. I think throughout our conversations, like last night at dinner when we were fishing or whatever, I keep bringing it back to the paleontology stuff. And it's not dissimilar to, the FBI confiscating Sue, the most complete Tyrannosaurus up to that point. And I think still ever found, in housing her under lock and key in the School of Mines, confiscating it from Black Hills Institute. If you guys are interested, you can look up the Pete Larson podcast. Again, that's in the Dino Days playlist. Now, granted, those are very different things. Both have their extenuating circumstances, but it's funny to me in that I guess what they would argue is they'd be like, well, it has this crazy cultural relevance. It's this thing. It's a this. It's a that. It's part of history. Well, the whole reason that y'all are able to go look for it is because the history's already been so well documented.
There's certainly that, yeah.
To me, it seems like it's at odds with being I guess the justification for seizing a lot of it or demanding part of it is at direct odds with the way that it was able to be found in the first place, which if it's so crucial in, this historical record, why? What are you going to learn from that coin? And
you would think that it would be probably in everybody's best interest to have people spending their own money to go out and make the recoveries to bring it to light so you can potentially study it into the future if it is so critical. especially items in laying out in the ocean. I mean, the ocean is a violent place, and it's, corrosive saltwater environment. So, these artifacts aren't going to last forever, and they're in a constant state of degradation. And it's shown by when we recover artifacts, just their state of wear, and some artifacts are completely deteriorated. Many silver coins that we've found in the past actually don't even read on the metal detector. Those are in great shape, which is unique.
For sure. But I mean, like, you can tell that this one is going to be eventually fucked up beyond all recognition at some point.
Yeah, if it's sat in the ocean long.
Look at that thing.
Yeah, no, that's just it. I mean, obviously, I tell people that often. You don't take your car and park it in the ocean, right? Like, why not? Because it's going to be it's going to rust into nothing. You don't
run a freshwater boat.
Yeah,
through salt.
Exactly. Yeah. So, but that's
and the salt boats, you flush them out all the damn time.
Yeah. Again, you start to get into the ethics of these practices and stuff like that. I don't think as a society, archaeological practices have not been around for very long, technically. Especially in the grand scheme of human history. So, these things are still flushing themselves out. So
that's
ethical debates and stuff like that, I think it's all on the table for sure.
Yeah.
But, there is still some rationality that should accompany decisions being made. And so, like you'd mentioned, you get a heavy storm out here and it uncovers perhaps, some bones for a period of time. And, there's kind of a ticking time bomb because eventually they're going to say, they're eventually just going to erode into nothing. So would it be far better to let some, maybe even amateurs go out and poke around and make some of these discoveries and bring them to light, for the potential to study them into the future? Or do you just say, well, no, people shouldn't touch them at all. And then you just let them sit out there and rot. So I think anybody with any sense would obviously say, letting it rot is not the best course of action, but now who gets permission to do it and how they can, and these things all get kind of sticky.
So I mean, that's exact another parallel that I was going to draw between this and like the commercial fossil hunters. There is it's that same argument. It's like these fossils, they weathered out. That's why we can find them. But those same forces that expose them will also destroy them.
Mm-hmm.
And so is it better to aggregate a more complete fossil record where some of these things are being sold? Or is it better to have an incomplete fossil record just so nobody can make a buck?
What's interesting about that too is in that argument, it's been my experience. So you have someone who is a collector, let's say.
Yeah.
He collects his entire life. Maybe he's even put millions of dollars into purchasing different collections and has just a fabulous, like a museum in his house. When he passes away, it's likely that his offspring or, his heirs may not have the same level of passion. And so what are they going to do with that stuff? And a lot of times those artifacts wind up in a museum anyways.
Sure.
And just kind of ultimately. So, one thing we say too, like with these coins and stuff like that, you never really own the treasure. You just kind of hold on to it for a period of time, because it's you're in passing and that'll still be around when you're long gone.
Oh, dude!
Well, at least now that's out of the ocean, I should say.
Yeah, I mean, I was in the Chicago Field Museum the other day, and I was looking through their like gems and minerals archive,
mm-hmm.
and a lot of like the gem specimens they have are in the form of jewelry, and a lot of those were donated by the same person.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Yeah,
it's
because they've enjoyed it for their lifetime, and it's like, all right, well, my kids don't, they're just going to sell the stuff or throw it away, and I don't have the heart to necessarily want to see that happen to this collection I've put together. Right. So I'll either create some museum for myself and be able to show it in that regard, or physically, like you said, donate it to a proper museum and let them put it up for display. A lot of this stuff winds up in that in those, but too. These museums have millions and millions of artifacts over the courses of the years. And this is just in the last, 80, 90, 100 years of, archaeological practice. Again, try and count to 1 million. It'd take a long time. I mean, if any of this stuff is categorized and cataloged, properly, that in and of itself has got to be a monumental task. But obviously no one person is going to go through and view 8 million artifacts, right? So like,
sure.
How many representative samples of, different teeth from dinosaurs do you need? You have a couple you put on display, and the rest, I don't know. Does it serve the public tax roll to keep them in in the back room forever?
And honest to God, like I even understand the impetus to have archives like that, because some of these dinosaurs do get like, I mean, you'd be shocked at like what can constitute a new species of dinosaur, to the point that it's like a common point of contention in academic fields. It's like, okay, is this a new varietal of dinosaur, or is this a dinosaur bone with like a weird pathology that looks to be, but it's really like some sort of disease or something like that. This I don't understand. Like, man, if it's like something like truly like remarkable, like a coin in such a way that nobody has ever seen it, like, and you need an example of that amongst like, maybe it's the only one, or maybe it's one of like 1,000 just like it. I could understand wanting to have a representative of that. I don't understand why you need 999 duplicates of that. And it's recent enough that I'm just like, gosh, it would be like, it would be almost as if the people who study the Civil War demanded that every musket ball or mini ball or whatever it was that was ever been found in anywhere related to the Civil War needed to be turned over because we needed every single bullet we could find from the Civil War. It's like, I don't know, man, maybe there were just like a lot of those fucking things and they all kind of look the same. And like, yeah, they're interesting. It's fun, but it's like, it's a gateway science. It's a gateway to history. It's like, yeah, these are cool because they're circulated in the public sphere. They're cool because people can have something like this at their house, and it shouldn't only be at their house. There should absolutely be examples of all these things in museums. But I don't think they're mutually exclusive. I think they can exist in both places. I think that if somebody wanted to study this coin, they could take it, they could make a detailed laser scan of it, and they could put it in an archive on a computer that took zero space rather than, or I mean, as much as a computer takes, or as much as a hard drive takes. I'm not necessarily sure they need to have this thing in their possession, with, certain exceptions. There are things that are invaluable. The Mona Lisa, right? It's like, yeah, there's something about that has to be in a museum. I just don't feel the same way about it personally. I mean, like, that's my take on it.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, this is why it's still a debate, and everybody's got their own opinion. Yeah.
Well, so I guess like kind of moving on from that, the contentious point of it. What do you do after you find 1,000 coins? Like, what comes next? Like, are there things that you guys are like looking forward to? I mean, the nature of a treasure hunter, man.
Well, apparently I get on a plane and fly to Montana and do a podcast and fish for brown trout in a stream with a fly rod. So
we're going to have to do some more of that afterwards.
I mean, game on. So yeah, that's one thing that I do.
But like, as far as, are there, without getting into specifics, are there like, are there any sections that you're like, dude, I cannot wait till next season to explore that?
Yeah. I mean, this is the way it always works. I mean, because I mentioned we're always kind of in our high probability areas. Obviously, we just made a fantastic find, and we know there's more finds to be made. I mean, the more that we work, the more stuff we find. It's just, it's a numbers game at that point. So yes, I never want to do anything else. This is, my passion and what, I'm in it for, but our life is governed by the weather, and there's no fighting Mother Nature. So it is what it is. But yeah, as soon as we get back out there, we're just going to pick up right where we left off ultimately. And that's, kind of just been a continuation of it all along. So for whatever various reasons, we're not allowed to go back to these spots. We'll go to another spot that we are able to go to and pick up where we left off there, and implement the same methodologies and practice, and have success in other areas. We're professionals at this, so this is what we do.
I love that. Yeah. And I mean, like, the other thing is people have this idea that like, oh, you know, treasure hunters don't play by the rules. And that does not seem to be the case right now. That treasure that you guys found is like being looked at by like the state, is subjected to the same, like, it's like a cooling off period, kind of like a waiting period.
Well,
for
so
somebody.
the 1,000 coins in particular, they need to go through the the archiving process, and they need to be conserved. So all of them have to be cleaned, and that is a bit of a daunting task. So it's been broken down to about 20 to maybe 25 minutes a coin, just in the way that it's photographed and weighed, both pre and post conservation, cleaned. Put in the computer, all that. I mean, it's a tremendous amount of work. So, you figure 20, 25 minutes a coin times 1,000, do the math. Yeah. It's going to be a hot second before all that's done. So, there's certainly that. The state of Florida will get up to 20% of any recoveries made on the sites. So that all works itself out. So, there's that aspect of the off-season stuff that takes place as well. Yeah. Yeah, and that's all part of the process, so to be expected.
Well, it's part of playing by the rules, right?
Well, it's certainly that. I would say, too, that people who, and this goes for anything, when you first start off doing anything, you come at it with little experience, and so you're very kind of superficial or on the surface in your understanding of things and the way that you practice. And so, I think one thing that most people instantly their mind is diverted to is like, well, if I found 1,000 coins, I wouldn't tell anybody. And I keep like,
yeah, you probably should though.
Yeah. And fair enough, but we wouldn't be able to be out there and working to find these coins if we were acting like that. So, that's kind of the way that it shapes out, if that makes sense.
Dude, that makes total sense.
Yeah. And so with that, but a guy like myself who's now done it for so long, it's evolved into something to where I find a little more meaning, I think, in a deeper way that is, far removed from that just like smash and grab and get what I can.
Yeah, it's not the monetary value. You enjoy cataloging this stuff.
That and, the history of it, being able to share that with, yourself, now your viewers, and just like and share that history. I mean, that's all part of it. The fantastic doors it opens up to me, to fly to Montana and go trout fishing. But, these types of things, they're all unforeseen things that come as a result of this. And for me, after having done it for so many years, that's part of, I would say, in large part, the reasons that I do it. And, not to be cliche and, these are my treasures, but, the people that I associate with and stuff like that, I mean, you can't put a value on all that. And that, to me, that's what it's evolved into. So, it is in large part a glorified hobby, but, it's the adventure of life. I mean, anybody that sets out, and not getting inspirational here, but just anybody that sets out on pursuing a dream, and I'm going to go out and find treasure in the ocean or something like that. I mean, certainly that's a wild aspiration and dream to have, but anybody that sets out on that, that's the adventure of life. You take those steps on that journey and life starts to unfold to you, and it's not all peaches and cream and roses and stuff. I mean, it's a lot of heartache and a lot of hard work to get you to where you want to be. But, that's what makes it fantastic and such an interesting story and kind of gives your life some meaning and some value. So, that's to me, that's all part of it as well. So it's a little more all encompassing than just like I've went out and found a handful of coins and now I'm rich or whatever, Yeah. Yeah.
Well, all these things, even if you're wildly successful in them, they need to be rooted in like a passion for the work.
Absolutely. I think to be able to generate the persistence necessary to achieve your dreams, and not accept failure to become ultimate defeat, you have to found yourself a little more on some principles. And, if your principles are shaky, then you're going to be building a house of cards and, wind blows a little bit and you crumble. And so, again, philosophically, just standing on some type of good foundation, you can only construct things that are founded well and well constructed. And, those are the types of things that really, again, provide you wealth in a way that is incomparable to monetary wealth or, some shiny trinkets, so to speak. Yeah. So,
well, it's, it's kind of like the same way that, that's only an ounce of silver, but it's worth a lot more than an ounce of silver. Right. It's kind of the
it's the story behind it for sure.
It's the stuff attached to it.
Yep.
Okay. I got a couple more questions for you and then we're going to go out and do some more fishing.
I'm ready to fish, baby.
One, and this is just kind of like a point of curiosity. Do you know about how many, commercial, historical shipwreck salvage companies there are operating right now?
Currently?
Yeah.
I'd say only a handful. Yeah. Over the years, it's become less and less just because as the regulations have become more stringent. But, oftentimes, well, I shouldn't say oftentimes, but every so often, governments all throughout the Caribbean or wherever who have previously decided that it may not be a good idea to go out and do this in their waters, then have a change of heart and kind of come to see the light. And, next thing you know, they want to go out and do it. And so guys like us, our phone rings because, who else do you call to do something like this, right? Like you should call somebody who has some experience in it if you have any good sense because, whereas you would think, it should be relatively easy to just strap on a metal detector in a tank and go out and find stuff. Yeah, I think you would quickly realize that is not the case at all. So
I have done the metal detecting without a scuba tank around here in Montana. Let me tell you, I found a lot of BBs. I found a lot of bullets, a lot of hot rocks, a lot of iron ore.
Yeah.
I've not found any gold doing that.
Yeah.
It is, if it's anything like that, it's way more, it is more difficult than you think, listener, viewer. Okay. Do you remember the first piece of treasure that you ever found?
So when I first started treasure hunting, I was sitting at my buddy's house, and my buddy at the time, I was sitting at his house. We were watching TV. Sure enough, there's Mel Fisher on television. And we got to talking, and we were already into all this kind of stuff anyways, hunting bones and stuff around our area and fishing and all that stuff. So I was like, we should give that a shot. My dad's got an old metal detector at the house. Like, I'll go home and grab it, eat dinner. I'll come back tonight. We'll go down to the beach, see what we can find. So I did so. Picked him up, went down to the beach. It's as dark as a black steer's tuchus on a moonless prairie night. We got nothing out there, but the flashlight in my hand and this old, really POS metal detector. And man, I'm just walking along the beach, and as soon as I turned that thing on, I started finding silver coins. And
what?
I'm down low on the beach finding silver coins. I'm up high on the beach finding silver coins. There was pretty much nowhere I could go that particular night.
Like these kind of things?
Silver, they were small.
Yeah, but like...
old?
Okay.
Needless to say, I figured I hit it, right? Like, yeah. 2 pockets full of these things. The whole time I'm driving back to his house, I'm talking about the new Impala I'm going to buy and the down payment I'm putting on this house and this and that. Of course, he's just living it up. Get all the way home another 20 minutes later in front of his wife before he finally reveals to me that all the coins have been fake. So while I was at home getting dinner, he was stamping out little lead coins and striking crosses on them.
Your friend's an asshole. That is such a dick move.
Isn't that a dirty thing to do to somebody? But, honestly, and, I don't know if that kind of struck the chord with me or not, but, I definitely felt what it would feel like to actually, holy cow, find something.
Okay, first real piece of treasure you found.
Well, anyway, so, that really locked me in. I would say probably just a small silver coin. I guess I don't even really know when. Yeah, it would have had to have been a small silver coin. Yeah, nothing, grandiose or fantastic to write home about.
But I mean, like I remember the first morel mushroom I ever found.
Oh, right on. Do they have those here? Oh, snap. Bada bang. Yeah, those are so good. Yeah, I mean, I mounted it and gave it to my mom. So,
That's a cool ass thing to do.
That's what you do with your, that's what you do. But anyways, yeah. So, it's not like I went out and there it was or whatever. So actually for me, it's kind of been very much a grind. And interestingly enough, with my particular level of expertise, I seem to have missed out on the whole beginner's luck thing. And so, and I don't know, maybe to my own benefit in the long run, because by forcing me to, struggle through all the not finding to actually get to the place where I am making finds, it caused me to change my action a lot and try different things and, really double down on the methodologies and stuff like that. So I think it's made me a better person in the long run, if that makes sense. So, yeah. So,
you're building like
fortifying myself in a way. Like, so if you stick with it and then you finally discover a spot that may,
like in 20 years, you're going to be sick.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah. So, then that's all part of it. But, I think that's qualified me to write the book on how to do what we do in some capacity.
And you are writing the book about that.
If there ever was to be a how-to. I am attempting, but, I am a historic shipwreck salvager and a person of the ocean. So I'm not a writer, but I'm
going to offer to be one of like your first like readers, right?
Okay.
And then I'm going to read it. And I'm going to figure out exactly how to do this. I'm going to be like, no, man, this isn't good. You should never publish it.
There you go. Honestly, and I tell
all your secrets.
I tell this to people too. I'll give you the GPS numbers on where this stuff was found because it's so difficult. I mean, unless you really knew what you were doing out there, you could be on the spot, as I mentioned, and you don't stand a chance, honestly.
Yeah.
So
what is your favorite piece of treasure that you've ever found?
It's a great question. I think,
Don't you dare say your wife, man.
Yeah, no, I think, well, we're talking more specifically. Yes, thank you, my son. But more specifically with the treasure, I don't know, I mean, in my 25 years of doing this, we've discovered everything that you could possibly imagine being on one of these shipwrecks. And to me, it's all fascinating. If I had to pick any one particular thing, I don't know if I could do it, honestly. Gold chains, bars, gold coins, cool. Things like that. In 2006, we found a very unassuming lead box about shaped like that. And when we finally got it back into the lab and opened it up, it was filled with 16,000 natural saltwater pearls that came from pearl divers off of, north coast of, like Venezuela, Isle of Margarita area up in there.
Wow.
Where pearl divers were back then. So, completely fascinating find. Very interesting, incomparable to anything else.
Do those degrade in salt
yes,
water?
Yes, they actually do. And, part of what made this so remarkable is that because they were intact in that lead box, they just were preserved. Yeah. Wow. Yeah. And I mean, it was packed completely full of pearls. And there was one in there that was about the size of a jawbreaker.
Like soldered shut?
No, I mean, the lead box was just closed, again, it was just something, it was in somebody's passenger cargo, they were just bringing it back, but it was pretty cool, man.
That is pretty cool.
Yeah.
If somebody wanted something like this, right, you can get it through, auction houses. You can get it through a lot of ways. You can also get it through like gift shops in like the Cayman Islands or something like that. If somebody wanted to make sure that they were getting something like this ethically sourced, right? Like by somebody, who had all the right permits, did all the right things with the right localities. Is there a way for them to do that? Like, is there like, do you have a good route for somebody to assure the provenance or like something for them to avoid?
Yeah, I would say avoid. I hate to down anybody on the internet, but if you just buy stuff off of Marketplace or something like that, you're obviously standing a possibility of purchasing a forgery. And there are a lot of them out there. And even guys like myself who know coins and stuff like that could easily be fooled because people do a good job making fakes, So I would say the certificate of authenticity is what really gives it its provenance. And so getting a non-forged certificate is what's going to be the real deal. And when you purchase that, I think you'll pretty well know that you're buying it from someone that's legitimate at that point, whether it be a coin shop or whatever. Most of the time, if you're buying it from a legitimate coin shop, they're going to tell you, what the story is with it, and it'll have that
came from, how they noted it.
Yeah. And but there's always a chance that you do get scammed, and it happens to the best of them. So it's not unlikely, but it's like anything. People, there's forgeries for everything, right? So yeah,
that's true.
Yeah, people are all out there scamming each other.
Well, is there anything you want to tell people before we get out of here? Do you got any final thoughts, places that people could find you, things that they should look into, like, maybe the 1715 Fleet Society?
Yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah, I would say, part of, which I mentioned, part of me being here is just to share the history of what we do. So thank you very much for giving me that opportunity.
For sure.
And and the experience, I mean, you've rolled out the red carpet and it has been a great experience for me so far. So thank you very much for that, and an honor to be here. So I definitely say that. The 1715 Fleet Society is a great nonprofit organization that really champions the historical aspect of what we do around the 1715 fleet. definitely recommend checking that out. On their website, they have a treasure of the month, and you can kind of scroll back, and they've just done a great job archiving different finds of, through the last 40, 50 years, and then telling a little bit of story about them. So that's a great place to get information. And maybe see you out there off the coast of the Treasure Coast with a metal detector in your hand on the beach, looking for your treasures, I guess. Yeah.
All right. Well, dude, thank you so much for coming on. It's been a pleasure. I really appreciate you making the trip. Let's go fishing.
Let's do it, man. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Hey,
All right.
We'll see you guys next time right here talking about more cool shit, I guess. Treasures.
Treasure.
When people think of modern man, right? I guess when you're in grade school, you're taught about the Fertile Crescent and, that area of the land between two rivers, right?
That's totally the wrong story.
Oh, really?
Yeah, nobody ever wanted to be a farmer.
Yeah.
Foragers actually have got a good life, and they've got a lot of leisure time. And there have been cases like there's a group in Tanzania called the Hadza, which still live a foraging lifestyle. And the Tanzanians are embarrassed about that, because they think it makes them look backwards. And as a third world country, I think, they don't like that image. So periodically, like folks from the development office or, agricultural department or whatever will go out and round the Hadza up and try to settle them in a village and teach them how to plant. And they go back a few months later and they're all gone. They're back in the bush, right? Because it's a good life.
Yeah.
People adopted agriculture because they had to. Populations were growing, and that limits, foraging is sustainable at certain population levels, but you basically have got to get into food production. And those early agriculturalists, it must have been horrible. Their diseases are through the roof. Their nutrition is poor. Because for the first time they're living at higher population density where infectious diseases become more of a
They can
problem.
circulate. Yeah.
Hygiene, and local pollution is a problem. Diet quality, because protein starts to drop in the diet and it's more carbohydrate-based diet. So you start seeing a bunch of anemias and stuff like that. Stature goes down. So probably, we've gotten now to the point where we're good at it, right? And so it's very comfortable.
But the first attempts are not like what I'm imagining, like these like fields of green and this very like these pioneers of agriculture just being stoked on this decision.
Right.
It was a bunch of people that were like, we don't have a better option. This shit sucks, but like we got to keep doing it.
Yeah, we like to think of the evolution of these things as like progress. It's like, oh, somebody got the bright idea to plant stuff, and that's easier than foraging. But it's a lot of times it's not progress. It's like necessity.